Good evening, and welcome back to the INVICTUS RPG Academy, Episode 1. That's right, hello, and welcome back, or should I say welcome for the first time to the INVICTUS RPG Academy. My name, of course, is Professor Harlan, as you can see by the nameplate that is not on the bottom of the screen. And I want to welcome you to the first of what I hope is many adventures together into the crazy, wild world of RPGs. First off, let's start with who the INVICTUS stream is, what we are doing here, and what we do. And I'm going to try to maintain my accent for as long as possible. The INVICTUS stream is a place where myself and a few of my friends get together every Wednesday night. I think I've dropped my accent a little bit. It's gone something else. We get together every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock and we stream role-playing games. We cover a wide variety of different systems and types. I'm dropping it. We cover a lot of different types of games. We do Dungeons and Dragons. We do Call of Cthulhu. We do Numenera. We do a lot of the Monte Cook systems. And every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, we stream a game, come hell or high water, unless there's a death. And that is what the INVICTUS stream is. We've been around for 2 years, and we are continually going along. But what is this here for? Well, first and foremost, the reason this exists is because of a little charity that we are becoming a part of called the Extra Life Charity. And it is an organization that works with the Children's Miracle Network of Hospitals. The Children's Miracle Network of Hospitals is a charity that gives their proceeds directly to children in need that are in hospitals. We are currently trying to raise money for them, and it is a cause that we very strongly believe in. It is something that we are very happy to be in support of and to be working with. So first and foremost, this exists as a unlocked reward tier for the money we have raised so far. And so far we have raised a fair amount of money. Very happy with how much we've done. I haven't opened it up just yet because I'm waiting to get past all the introduction stuff first before pulling into the money. But Extra Life Charity, the link is in the description. Again, it's something that feels very strongly about. It's something that we're very excited to be working with. And it's going to culminate in a 24-hour live stream come November 4th, which will be a day filled with a lot of tired yawns, video games galore, as well as some role-playing games, and perhaps even another INVICTUS Academy episode, depending on what goes on. So that's who we are. That's why we're here. Or rather, what motivated this, and why we're actually here is to discuss some of the finer details behind role-playing. Now, I want to prelude this with a bit of a warning. The INVICTUS stream, and definitely myself, primarily myself, does not partake in role-playing games in the typical sense. We're very rules light. We're very role-play heavy. And the pros and cons of that are up for discussion very shortly. But if you are new to role-playing games, this might be the perfect video for you. This is something that might kind of spark that interest. Equally, if you are a veteran of role-playing games and maybe you've gotten a bit tired of the stale old rules of D&D, this also might appeal to you. If you're in the middle, this video is not for you. No, it's also for you. It's going to be a bit more open-ended. Because right now I am, of course, in front of the classroom. Follow the Discord chat link, in the description, and join the chat right now. I'm joined by Bjorn, Mark. It looks like Michael might be here. Let's do a roll call. Who's all in classroom? I want to be able to say hello to everyone. This is, of course, interactive, meaning if you have a question, all you have to do is raise your hand. Not physically, I won't be able to see it. But that is basically how it's going to work. We are going to go over 3 very important subjects near and dear to my heart that are more advanced techniques, I would say. Again, that's why the introduction might be interesting to you, but more importantly, the way this all comes together. The 3 subjects we will be dealing with today are going to be game prep, which is basically how to create a game and how I've created games in the past. We're going to be running into RPG etiquette, dealing with problem players, or what to keep in mind if you're new or a veteran, just sort of a refresher course in being nice and playing with each other. Not in that way. And the third step, or the third subject we're going to be covering, is creating memorable NPCs and the pitfalls that sometimes come when you try to create a character that you know the group is going to love, or you hope they're going to love. It's not always the case. So it looks like Bjorn is here. Looks like Lauren is here. Hello, Mike. We have a full classroom, people eagerly waiting. There will be a test at the end. So, get ready for that. It's not an 18+ warning today. I mean, there might be some swearing, but that's just the way we're going to do. We're going to keep it nice and light, introductory. I'm going to try to keep it as PG as possible. So, as I mentioned, the Extra Life Charity is why this is all created. If you donate during this class, you're going to be entered into the Broodling Manor, which is a little house that we have for all of our people in the Facebook group, as well as you are going to be given the quiz. The highest person scoring on the quiz at the end of today, it'll come later today, will be added as an NPC controlled by myself into our future game, which will be most likely an end of the world. So kind of neat. You get to be immortalized in our foolish rants and all that kind of stuff. So let's start the classroom. Oh, Mike says, how can you not swear? You're Canadian, which is true. Just used to the warning. Well, Canadians do typically like to swear a lot, so I'll try my best. And this way, even little kids can watch this video if they're looking to get into role-playing. So let's start here. Officially, what is role-playing? A role-playing game, in essence, and I want to preface this all with, these are my thoughts. Role-playing games have been around for a very long time. This is not an official video by any means. This is something to demonstrate the way I feel about role-playing games and to talk a little bit about how I utilize them and the various members of the Invictus stream, how we utilize them. So, if you were to strip it all out, all the stats, all the die rolls, literally, role-playing games encompass playing a role. Those roles come from the stories that the GM or the keeper or the dungeon master tells. And that's really what appeals to me about RPGs. Telling stories with your friends so that they can play the roles. The role of the GM, tell the story. The role of the PC, play a role. And that is as simple and basic and black and white as any RPG needs to be, in my opinion. Rules are fantastic. They're excellent. They build upon these worlds. They add structure so that when you roll a die, there's a sense of fairness. But it doesn't necessarily mean you need them in all stories. And anyone who's watched any of our videos will attest to the fact that rules typically go by the wayside in lieu of story and character building. The last campaign that we've just run, it's only a 3-parter, was Call of Cthulhu: The Witch's Mark. And if you haven't seen it, I'll put a thing here later. So check it out here, Call of Cthulhu: The Witch's Mark, because I'm going to be talking a little bit about it in this video. Only as examples and only because it's fresh on my mind and recent. But one of the ideas behind that is the focus is on a story and the focus is on the characters. Giving the PCs the opportunity to really envelop their characters, bring them to life, make them feel like real people. And telling a story that's hopefully interesting and has a few twists and turns. Now, the level of degree in which you have freedom in these stories is always up for debate. Some people would argue that a true RPG experience should be absolutely, completely open to the player's options. They should have free reign. There should almost be no story unless they go searching for it and take detailed notes and push it on that way. I don't necessarily think I would agree with that. The reason being is it puts a lot of pressure on the PCs to try to create a story within this world. And there is an amount of freedom that comes from a role-playing game, but unlimited freedom is a bit scary. It's taxing, it's frustrating for the GM to try to encompass every aspect. And that's not the way I play games. The way I do it is a story that they are free to divert and have different options. Think of it as sandbox, and we'll get into sort of breakdown details of how they work. But the 3 sort of archetypes of stories and how they work will be coming later on. But and again, the reason I'm explaining this is because it's my personal GM style, and I would hate for someone to come along this video and say, well, this isn't how D&D works. This isn't the official way. That's okay. This is the way I do it, and it might be something that you are of interest, or is of interest to you as well. So, Chapter 1. or part one, I should say, game preparation is the first subject we're going to be talking about today. Reign of Peace, welcome. I don't know your name, so you let me know your name. This is roll call. Mark, I know you were kidding, no worries. The 18+ warning may come into effect. I'll say it about halfway through. And if there are any questions, please let me know. Again, the chat is Discord. It is in the link of this video's description. So please go ahead, ask any questions that might be of interest to you. And we can either field them at the end when there might be a more appropriate time to mention them, or I will answer them as we go along. So, game preparation. In essence, there are two ways that I feel that you can prep a game. And what is game preparation? This means you're running a game for your PCs. What do you get together? Do you get all the handouts? Do you get all the pieces of map? Do you get all the character sheets printed up beforehand? Do you get your story in place? Do you get this? There's a lot of elements to running a game, and it can be awfully confusing. It can be bombarding. It can be powerful. But the reason I started off by outlining what a role-playing game really is, in essence, telling a story and creating a role as the PCs and as the GM, is because that's what it comes down to when you are prepping a game. As the GM, you are telling a story. What the PCs do with that story, how much they go off track, how much they want to go wacky and wild and free, that's up to them. And that's ultimately what's going to cause you a bit of frustration, maybe, if you're trying to craft a very detailed story. But also, it's what makes it interesting and what gives them that sort of freedom. So when you're prepping a game, start with the story. And we'll get into all that stuff in just a second. Yo, says Bjorn. Hey, says Mike. Can we get me a bit louder? Absolutely. It's as loud as it goes. I can always move the mic closer, but I'll just talk louder. So, Paul. Hi, Paul. So, now, Paul, you're more of a traditional RPG player as well. I know you're very rules-based, so this video might not be in line with what you're thinking, but maybe it will give you a view into the way we run games, and then you can disagree with it passionately. Because arguing is the spice of life, friends. So, as a GM, when it comes to your story, there are really two ways to sort of tackle. You can choose a system that fits your story, or you can build a story within your system. Now, systems, there's massive variety. There are systems, Dungeons & Dragons, D20-based systems. There are Fate systems, which use plus and minus die, which I don't understand. There's like a D100 system, which is what Call of Cthulhu utilizes. And these are all systems. Typically, systems are tied with their genres. However, there are more universal systems. GURPS and Fate, again, can apply to multiple systems. So if you're making a story, or if you're making a game, you can go about it one of two ways. You can choose your system and say, I want to run a Dungeons & Dragons game, and then create your story based in that. Or you can think of a story and choose a system that would fit into that. 99.9% of the time, will make a story and choose a system that fits into it. To me, it's a lot less restricting. When you're looking at, I have a fantasy setting. I have orcs and humans and elves. I have limited number of humans. It really bogs down what you have in when you're trying to write a story, something that's absolute freedom. The campaign The Strange that I ran a year ago or 2 years ago was the best example of writing a story and then, choosing a system that fit, because I wanted to tell a story that spanned everything. Dracula, whatever the heck was else in there, the jungle, Daventry, a fantasy setting. I wanted to be in an apartment building at certain points. And The Strange was sort of the system that I retrofitted to utilize that. But you might not want that. You might not want absolute freedom, in which case choosing a system first might be beneficial to you. It gives you a little bit more, not restricted, but it gives you a bit more guidelines. It gives you something to follow. You know what you're in. You know what world you're looking at. Terminator is a prime example of, kind of going everywhere. Oh, hi, Brianna, as well. So those are sort of the two ways that you can do it first and foremost. Paul says, my return RPGs have been based on us using the rules as guides rather than a law. So I got a bit lost. There are no rules at all, which is fair. And it does go back actually to like the first game I ever ran did not have a rules system. What I had was, I just wrote down what I knew a target number would be on a D20, and that was it. That was the extent of it. So it was sort of all over the place. But those are the two ways that you can start the system. So going through my way, how I do it is I choose a story. And in essence, there are 7 elements to creating a story, in my opinion. I'm just gonna stop saying in my opinion, because all of this is my opinion. You can debate it till you're blue in the face. This is just where I'm at. Genre, themes, feeling, hook, global objective, locations, and NPCs. There's your 7 elements to creating a story. You get those 7 elements, you have yourself a story. Easy, done, game prep completed. No, that's just the first step. So those are the 7 elements. When you have those, you have yourself a story. When you have a story, you can finish all the elements of actually doing the game prep. So, a story. It can be the most time-consuming part, because oftentimes you're going to go back and rewrite and kind of add things and change things, because ultimately, as you're creating however many games you might be running, elements might change. You might add people in so they fit later on in your campaign. But ultimately, those 7 elements are what is going to guide you, or what's going to guide you. Genre. Now, this is choosing a story first and not the system first. So, you have anything when you want to start with the story first. You can do Western, sci-fi, horror. You could do a drama. You can do 70s cops that are dirty. Not dirty sexually. Dirty as in like they take money. You can do, you can do anything. You could just do a straight up adventure. Something Indiana Jones style. So once you pick your genre, you're starting to get yourself into a mindset of what you want to move forward with. And that's why genre is typically the one that best defines, and why I always do it first. When I thought of The Strange, it was an adventure. There was a system to back it up, but really what I wanted them to do was try to get home. It was an adventure to get home. That comes later on with sort of the theme and the hook, but adventure was the genre. Themes is the second. When it comes to themes, you deal with whatever the global kind of feel is. And it's different than the objective. It's different than feelings, which is funny because I said how it feels. Because the theme is sort of what's going to run throughout every aspect of the game. With The Strange, I know I'm referencing it a lot, it was sort of an immediacy. They were constantly trying to get home. They were being pushed from world to world to world. So that theme was constantly moving forward like a barreling train, was the attempted theme. It doesn't always happen. The theme in the most recent Call of Cthulhu campaign, I would say, could be anything from, just a general mystery to betrayal to something like that. But having a theme, rather than a feeling, because that is the next step, having a theme allows you to sort of analyze what's going to be happening in each scene. As you come across a scene, you might be saying, okay, well, what's the theme here? I'm trying to keep the immediacy going. I'm trying to get the idea of betrayal. In the last Call of Cthulhu, and this video is going to be riddled with spoilers, by the way. In last Call of Cthulhu, you could say, again, that the theme was, as by design, a no-win scenario. I gave the idea of that they could sort of win, but if you go back and watch, everything was really a no-win scenario. And that echoed through every scene that they did to reinforce that idea. Think of it like almost a thesis. And essentially that's sort of what a theme is. It's going back to that original idea. So, The Strange, we had an adventure, was the genre. The theme was, in that case, I guess it would be more moving home, was sort of getting home, was sort of, well, that's more the goal. I guess the theme in that one would have been, well, we'll use Call of Cthulhu because it was literally the one I just used. Genre being horror, the theme being the no-win scenario, would be the 2 first steps to defining that scenario. Then we have feelings. What are the feelings that you're trying to create throughout the campaign? And it's important to focus on the feeling, because oftentimes it's the easiest thing to misstep. If you're really trying hard to create a sense of dread, if you don't have it predefined, you might more than likely forget by the 3rd game, or depending on how many games you're going. So, is the feeling accomplishment, terror, doubt, escalation? What's the theme, or the feeling rather, that you're trying to communicate as you're going through it? Brianna wants you to cover plotting a mystery at some point. And you said it 4 times, so it's obviously important. Oh, Mike's taking off. Cheers, Mike. He'll be back in a few. I will hold you to that. So, genre, themes, feeling. are sort of to define what you're going to be doing. It's going to give you the best idea. And the reason you do those first and foremost is because you can refer back to them as you're moving through them. The hook. The hook is arguably the most important thing. It's the opening plot device that's going to fuel your story. It's the idea of what's going to really interest the players. Is it going to be a missing gun, a derelict ship floating in space, an abandoned mine? The hook in The Strange was getting home. The hook in Call of Cthulhu was the missing girl. And the hook is what inspires you to want to tell the story. If your hook isn't convincing to you, it's not going to be convincing the players, and most importantly, you're going to get bored of writing it in about five minutes. The theme of Numenera is save the world. There you go. Spiral's here. Hello, you're late. Take a seat. He says hi to the class. That's okay. You can say it multiple times, Michael. It's no big deal. The hook, again, most important for you. I gotta say, it's the most important thing for me. If I don't have a hook that interests me whatsoever, I'll abandon the story. And believe me, I have about 3 or 4 abandoned RPG ideas because I didn't find the hook was strong enough. Love the theme, love the genre. It was Western, epic adventure, globe trotting, but the hook just wasn't there. And there's something that you continually work on. And that's the beauty of having the 7 elements, because you can go back and tweak singular elements to sort of redefine what it's going to be. The 5th one is the global objective, which can be different than the hook. The hook is what inspires the game. It's what inspires the PCs to start the game. But the objective is, what they're doing in this game, what their goal is. They can be the same, the hook and the objective, but depending on how many games you're running, they're most likely going to be different. Think of the best stories that you've seen in movies or TV, or even common procedural cop shows. They'll have a hook that sometimes relates to the end story, but most of the time it'll change about 5 minutes in, or Simpsons or something. They start off and Homer's whatever, he's stuck in the fridge for some stupid reason, and then it diverts and it's Lisa's story. The hook draws you in, so it's usually more interesting, but the objective fuels the story and their goals. The global objective. The reason they can be different is because oftentimes the hook isn't enough to push forward. It could be something that's easily solvable, or while they're trying to solve that hook, it unveils the deeper objective. So, genre themes, feeling, hook, global objective. The last 2, locations. When you're writing a story, what kind of locations do you want to include? And this is a really important step because it's so easy to get boring when you're writing a story. And oftentimes, and we're going to touch on this in a bit, but oftentimes when you're writing a story, if you're stuck in like a ship or something like that, or a submarine, your scenes or your locations are going to be very repetitive. So what I often do if I'm writing a story is I'll write in complex, interesting scenes based on the genre, or locations, I should say, based on the genre and the themes that we've talked about, so that I can sprinkle them in a later date. And this, again, it keeps it diverse, it keeps it interesting, because one of the things that your PCs can definitely get sick of is if you're running over the same area or the same spot multiple times. Now, that's not to say it's not a bad thing. In certain cases, it can be good or important to the story. But oftentimes, you might want to have a list of locations that you're really interested in. So that's one to keep in mind. And then finally, the NPCs. NPCs, creating characters that exist within your story and within this world. And we're going to touch on NPCs later. It's going to be the 3rd sort of element to this. And actually, Bob's already asked a question regarding NPCs. Although Dennis Collins, starting out as an awesome PC, has since been more of an NPC, my question is, how did you come up with the idea of Dennis Collins, and how did you flesh him out? I am going to write that down to talk about in a second, because that's a really good question, and I do want to talk about that. But it fits so perfectly into NPCs that I'll talk about it in a little bit. And any questions like that, no problem, because what's going to happen is I'll just write them down, and we'll... someone summoned Beetlejuice. Beetlegeist, the correct terminology. So yes. So more on NPCs and answering Bob's question just in a bit, because there's going to be other questions that you might have when it comes to NPCs. Rin asked, do you do research about your locations, if realistic areas or on things like the ship, for example? Yeah. And I think, again, when you're writing a story, with any story, understanding the location in your mind is so important, because what you're doing is you're communicating that to the PCs. If you don't effectively communicate the scene as you see it in your head, problems can arise and unfairness can bring up. I remember a very strong scenario before the stream started where I was playing a game with Justin, and Justin was the GM, and it's not his fault. It was a combination of both of us, and we were in the woods, and I said I wanted to camp next to a large rock wall, with the intention that I would be able to survey the land and survey the road so that no one could sneak up behind me. And the way he described it, he said, okay, there's a large rock next to you, and so on and so forth. So I said, okay, I'm going to camp with the large rock behind me. Now, he said large rock and was thinking this big. I said large rock and was thinking this big. And sure enough, when I did get attacked, the first thing I said was, okay, I'm going to use the wall to my advantage. And he said, well, it's this high. They can still attack you through it. And that was an issue where, in that case, he probably understood the scenario, but he didn't explain it to the point where I understood it. And understanding your location, doing research, especially if it's something that you might be unfamiliar with, benefits that greatly, because that's where it can affect gameplay and the way the game kind of evolves. So important. But yeah, I personally try to do as much research as I can for things I don't understand. In certain cases, when research is beyond taxing, what I might do is fudge the location so it's a bit like, for instance, a fully functioning submarine where you need to know how it runs becomes a derelict submarine. Something so therefore you don't have to do the amount of research into figuring out how a submarine would actually work. Because the worst case scenario is you get someone that's playing your game that's a submarine ex-submarine commander, and they're like, nah, that's not right. That's not how that works. So it can be difficult, but yes, doing research like that helps greatly. And that's with crafting any story. If you're writing a story in general, you really want to understand. I wrote a story, it's not important. If we're asking questions, how do you feel about game world time? As in, the hard thing about lots of tabletops is that since it happens in real time, many adventures can literally just last about a week or so in the game world. I think both Cthulhu games, Deadlands, etc. Real time is tough, because oftentimes it can be your downfall. With Call of Cthulhu, The Witch's Mark, which again is going to be one that is referenced a lot in this game. So if you have not finished it or have not seen it, watch that first and foremost. But to give you an example, timelines are very important. And for that, I actually wrote out a timeline of the series of events that happened so that I best understood exactly what was happening with the characters. So again, the PCs, if you remember the game, started at 5 p.m. The car arrived. They arrived at the mansion to speak with Mr. Christian. They looked around the grounds. They left the mansion. They arrived at Edwin's. And I basically wrote out their timeline so that A, I understood it, and B, it wasn't something that they could unexplain. Now, with most with most games, it's not as important to have a timeline. With Call of Cthulhu, the game is based around investigation. You have to be airtight, unfortunately, and as much as work I try to do with that, it becomes difficult because especially if they divert a path, because ultimately you might have to rewrite large chunks of the game, which did happen in Call of Cthulhu actually. But no, having a timeline for very detail intrinsic games is very important, and understanding where your PCs could be or where they are can hurt with real world times. In other games, you can sort of fudge it. When it's not important, if they're not trying to create a timeline of events, honestly, you can stretch and shrink most of the timelines to benefit you. An hour can become 4 hours. 4 hours can become 5 minutes if you really needed to. Just sort of, expedite the process by either explaining it yourself and skipping over a little bit, which a lot of PCs don't like. And I know actually someone commented on the last campaign and said, you had large chunks of text to expedite the situation. And it's different because a lot of what I'm talking about now doesn't necessarily apply to the games that we run on the stream, because oftentimes we're also trying to meet a time crunch. Remember, if you're hanging around with your games or with your friends in your basement, story is important, but you don't need to guide the players as much because you have next week. You don't have to be done at 11 o'clock. Whereas with our games, yeah, there are times where I handhold the PCs and maybe twist things to tell a better story, but that's for the entertainment purposes, right? That's like trying to craft a story so you guys are going to enjoy it as much. In fact, the last game was doubly so, because with Call of Cthulhu, there were elements of the story that I told from a perspective that the PCs wouldn't see. For instance, the opening monologues for pretty much all 3 games, or just the last 2, were perspectives that they wouldn't see. And that gave them a difficult challenge of trying to play off. I mean, the opening paragraph for the second game revealed, or the third game revealed, that Mary was not dead. So they had to continue playing, pretending that they didn't know that. And that goes into the role-playing aspect of the PCs. And that's kind of one of the ways I wanted to challenge them. Because again, remember, the role-playing game is about story for the GM and playing a role for the PCs. And I gotta say, story for the GM is something that I think many people do well. But roles for the PC, giving them the benefit of the doubt, giving them the ability to sort of riff and create characters, is something that I don't see a lot of people doing. And that's part of the reason why I'm talking about NPCs later on, which will also touch on PCs. Because, I mean, the idea of, like, one thing you'll very rarely see in our games is that lineage scale, that neutral, lawful good, true good. Because I personally don't like that. I don't think that represents real life people. And if we're trying to communicate that characters are real life people, then why would they fit on that scale? And I often hear times of people who play, lawful good characters, and they're like, no, I can't do that because he wouldn't do that because he's lawful good. And I think my opinion on that changed when we played Draftskew Secret, and I tried to play a lawful good character, and I said, this, as much as he's lawful good in this situation, it doesn't make sense for him to do that. And I always hate excusing sort of your own character's behavior because of sort of this predefined label that you've given yourself. Because they're meant to be true characters. True characters bend and break and change. And when no one's looking, the most noble person may occasionally steal some gold. And that's why I like that aspect of it. So again, those are the 7 steps. Genre, themes, feelings, hook, global objective, locations, and NPCs. And more on sort of the details of story crafting in another episode. But those are the 7 steps. When you have what those 7 elements are, then the way I do is choose a system based on that. So if I went Western, that deals with betrayal, the feelings are going to be, accomplishment. It's going to be about a missing gun. The global objective is going to be, trying to stop an invasion of something or other. The locations are going to be, a warehouse, a freshly built mansion, and the NPCs are going to be a Wild West character, the general store owner named Shappy McShap. Those are my 7 elements. And again, they're going to be added to as we go back along the way. Actually, I think I just described the Jimmy Stewart movie. 18, the gun, the Winchester 78, because it's a Western where a gun gets stolen. That was not purposeful, but clearly I have that on my mind. And again, those are your 7 elements that you can refer to along the way. And that's the first element. Start with the story. When that story is built, when you have something that you can go back to, it is not perfect. It is not perfected. It is basically what you're working with. It's your map, and you can go back and add more as your story. Harlan, is your clock broken? Oh, in the background? Yeah, no, it's broken. That actually was taken from school. So Jeff says there's Canadian time zones. They're 10 minutes ahead of the rest of us. We're 10 minutes ahead. Yeah. It's so hot up here right now. I know you guys don't do whatever, but it's like 25 degrees, which is probably not hot for you, but it's hot for us Canadians. Spyro remembers Draftskew Secret. I do too. I really enjoyed Draftskew Secret, and we're going to be touching on that again in the future, hopefully. So, start with the story is the first step. Once you have your story outlined, you know your elements, and you sort of have crafted what your story is going to be. Then you move on to the next step, which is composing the scene. So, using Call of Cthulhu Witch's Mark, the first thing I did with all of my games is I create a master document. And here's where I'm going to be sharing a few of the supplements from there. So the first step, as I said, is creating a story. And now all my games start off the same way. I will sort of have a master file within the folder that I created. I will write down a few hooks or ideas that I have But they transfer per game. So typically what I'll do is I'll just copy and paste new stuff that just pops up. And these I just add to my phone as I'm doing them. So they're not necessarily part of the creation. But then I write my story. So here, what I did was I actually started in 1923, the year that the game started, and I started writing. I started writing what I wanted to happen in the story. And as I wrote, I've redacted stuff because it's going to come up in future games, and as I wrote the game, I went back and I added more history. And you can see it starts back here at 1908, where Mary's mother is raped by someone before finding out. She's approached by a thin man in gray, or thin gray man. So as I went back, as the story was created and built upon, I went back, added more, kept more open, and changed elements of that story. And the reason I did that is because that's what you do. The first thing is you need to create a story. And this story isn't the story that your PCs are going to follow. This is the story that encompasses the world that you exist within. For instance, when Chris did his Deadlands campaign, this was a story about a ancient cavern with these bug parasites. Regardless of what we found out about that story, a whole world existed behind the scenes. You know, he knew these people were married, when the bugs came, why the bugs were there. This is the keeper information in Call of Cthulhu. This is the Dungeon Master's Guide. And all of those are stories that, as much as they get to see, 25 degrees, that's cute, 38. Okay, but 25 degrees for us, again, we're Canadians, so like we're used to snow, you know. Celsius user, there you go. 71 is hot, you're terrible. I am hot. My computer is also on. And the air conditioning is very low, so. Yeah, Left Out. Left Out is stuff for Call of Cthulhu 2 and other games. There's a larger world being created here. San Francisco's 21, so there you go. So having that story is the same way that Rin asked about understanding an environment, you know. This is the way to create the idea of a bigger picture, so that they can reveal little parts of it. If you don't have a story, and if your story doesn't make sense, especially in a Call of Cthulhu game, the minute people start poking holes, it crumbles apart. Because if you don't know why the girl was taken, you know, and you try to think of it on the fly, and it's not a convincing argument, first off, they're going to start doubting, because every little thing a GM can do, you know, that will throw shade or suspicion, then they're going to start focusing on it. But secondly, it also means you didn't create a real world. If you know, if you think of something, you better hope it fits in, because it could, you know, that timeline is there for a reason. It could alter one of those timelines. If you say, you know, they got there at 5 o'clock, and you realize it doesn't make sense, then as investigators, they should catch that. And if you say, well, yeah, that was actually just a mistake, well, then you know that the whole world is falling apart because you didn't do your research. So that story is then created. So now the next step, creating scenes. So start with the story, then creating scenes. Creating scenes are essentially, the most important thing. Once you've done your story with all of these elements, you ask yourself questions. That's what I always do. As I move through each of those, I try to poke holes in it. Is the story interesting? Would I enjoy playing it? You know, does it support different styles of play, or only one type? Does it encourage a variety of ways to complete it? Are there multiple correct answers? These are all so important, because it's not good enough to write a story that might be interesting to you, but it's just a boring story to everyone else, or only has one correct solution. I mean, if it's by design, or if it's a no-win scenario, like, again, if it's purposely chosen for entertainment purposes or otherwise, and Witch's Mark was in a small part that, then that's different. But if you haven't asked those questions, then you should. You know, just because you're going to enjoy playing this game, would they? And that's not necessarily a reason to change it, but it's an important question to ask. Does it support different styles of play? You know, if you know some of your PCs are more talkative thinkers or more talkative players, communication-based players, can they solve this game, or does it require them to be strong the entire way through? Or vice versa. If it's only a talkative game and you have a lot of strong-minded players, does it support both styles of play? Good games don't only have one way to complete them. They should have multiple paths, so that it engages your players in creating the characters in the story along with you. So important. And with every step, ask questions like this, because if you're not asking those things, then ultimately you're not doing an effective job of storytelling, which is the easiest term to doing this. So, okay, so moving on to step 2, composing scenes. Now, scenes are, basically a setting for each location. Now, it doesn't have to be the physical location. You know, it can be anything from a series of events to a single moment, but basically breaking them down into one capsule so that it can be sort of transferred or swapped if need be. That's why the scene setting works. I like to use script writing as sort of an example. Anytime you see a script, it will say, you know, exterior, day, outside of house, or whatever. And then it will have a detail, you know, the outside of the house, it's a white house with a picket fence, yeah. Tiled roof, whatever, and then the characters enter and the scene begins. And that's typically how writing the scenes works as well. But the reason I say it doesn't necessarily have to be based on location is because sometimes that's not what your scene is meant to do. So you could try to be creating a scene for each location or event. You know, walking down a street, entering a cave, writing down what you have basically helps you visualize it. And going back to what Rin asked, you know, about doing research on a location, that's part of the reason scenes are so important, because it helps you visualize. So part of what I want to do today is actually create a game. So why don't we do this? Starting with the story, on Wednesday we're going to be running a new game. This Wednesday I'm going to be GMing it. I have no idea what we're going to be doing. And I don't want to worry about a system. If it fits End of the World, fair enough. Otherwise, I'll figure out a different system. So, let's start with genre. What genre do you guys want to see? And we'll say whoever gets the most votes, you know, we'll kind of do it and see what happens. In the meantime, Lauren asked, what does Holly think? You mentioned that she helped you at the end of Call of Cthulhu. She helped you with others. Did you get any inspiration from friends, family, coworkers? Also so important, and one of the steps actually, because the end game is talking to other people about it. One of the best sayings that I ever had was, you know, a stone doesn't get smooth on a like surface. It needs abrasiveness to smooth out. You know, you can't shine a diamond on another diamond. Well, you can, but my point is you need sandpaper. And having someone sort of poke holes in what you're doing or question why this is happening is one of the best things. The reason it's not up at the top or as important with the story element is because oftentimes we don't have people that we can bounce ideas off of. Your coworker might not want to be like, hey Joe, so I wrote this Call of Cthulhu adventure with this girl, you know, her stepdad's raping her, and they might be like, yeah, you know, I'm good. Harlan, you don't need to share. So it can be tough, but no, bouncing ideas is so important. Do you have descriptions ready for unimportant NPCs and locations that you don't plan on having the characters really explore just in case? Absolutely. And that's what creating those scenes is important. So, starting with the story, composing those scenes. Again, write the scenes, pepper in descriptions. As you create the scenes, head back to the story and add them, change them. Keep it diverse and interesting. And again, heading back to The Witch's Mark, which again, we're going to be heavily referencing. So, again, like I said, we have the story up here, The Witch's Mark. Here's the background, everything that they don't know. Here are a few characters that have existed so that we know, you know, what it looks like. But, let's see, here's part one. Here's my intro that I've written, the train station and whatnot. There's my little credits. And this is basically how I frame all of my campaigns. I have the location, the investigation office. I have whatever is going to happen in that. And look, right here, I have optional. So right off the bat, there was if the game, in my case, I typically do them if the game is running quickly or short or whatever. The optional here was a sort of a side quest where a woman would have been knocking and she would have looked thin. And there was also some Jared Coombs stuff came in. And then the next scene is the mansion. And again, everything that's going to happen within the mansion is its own block. The great room I've separated. So these are what the scenes look like. I've separated the mansion and the great room because I knew there were elements to each that sort of required their own knowledge and information and all that kind of stuff. The girls' room is its own information. Aspects that they must find, optional finds, general room searches. All of these are encompassed when you break down the scenes of what's needed in your game or your RPG. Now, the scenes aren't just for a story-driven game like Call of Cthulhu. When I do an End of the World game, all I do are scenes. I have the general story. In that case, it's a lot more stripped down. It's usually a paragraph or so. You know, zombies have infected the world. They're coming through meteors, and it's a farm. Following those 7 steps, I still have all 7 steps, but they're very straightforward. And then I'll start with the scenes. Arriving at the farm. the first, entering the barn, entering the house, the basement. And the reason that, again, to focus on Rin's point, there are elements within those that are optional, elements within those that might not get used. And because of the nature of them being compartmentalized, if they tackle the objectives in different ways, you have to have them able to switch. So for instance, if I have the arrival and then the barn and a sort of, you do a description of the barn, the barn, you walk into the barn, it's beautiful light shining through, blah, blah, and all what could happen in the barn, and then I have the farmhouse. Well, what happens if they go to the farmhouse first? So that's why you can't write it all as one big piece. So then you take that compartmentalized, house, and you just switch them, or you on the fly, you scroll down and you scroll back up when they attack the barn. So using that scene, composing those scenes, gives you the advantage as a GM to be able to rearrange them or delete them as needed. It also gives you sort of a global view of what you're doing and whether it's interesting and diverse. So that you can complete your story. And that's essentially the next step. Writing the story, composing the scenes is the next step. And again, with every step, you ask yourself questions. Do the descriptions of my scenes make my vision clear? And this is what we talked about with Rin. Am I communicating exactly what I see? If they walk into a barn and I say there are long stone pillars that are about a foot wide, or I say there are long stone pillars, and then there's a battle and one of the guys says, oh, I run behind a pillar. And then afterwards you say, oh, no, they're only a foot wide, and he says, oh, shit. Now, in that case, it's not a big deal. But let's say, he wasted his entire turn and ended in front of a pillar and he already rolled and you can't go back and try to re-explain. Having very clear descriptions of the important pieces are so important. And that's why asking those questions and making sure everything is fleshed out gives you an idea. Have you pointed out all the possible options in the scene? If there's a door that's open a crack, if there's a hatch, or if you want them to discover it, you can say, oh, it looks like you can only see a bit of this room. Because you can't blame somebody for not catching something if you haven't described it. If I want them to check the hatch on the floor of the barn, and I barely mention it, if I say, you enter the barn, it's fully lit, and you see nothing, it's beautiful, and there's a door out back, open, and that's where you need to go. It's very unlikely that they're going to spend time in there, because you haven't really given them any reason to. Does it seem too familiar to another scene? Does it add variety? This is really important, in my opinion, because a lot of GMs oftentimes will write very similar scenes back to back to back. You go to a bar, to another bar, to another bar, to another bar, or something like that, or your town, to another bar in town. And there's nothing wrong with it. But if you have the option of creating scenes, diversify. If they go from, and a great example actually is, again, a great example for my own game. No, an example. For Call of Cthulhu, they had to speak with Mr. Christian about 3 times. And all 3 of those times, they could have gone back to his mansion. The first time was when they actually went to his mansion and they spoke to him about the missing girl. Then they went to Edwin's bar. Then they go back to the mansion to speak to him, and he reveals that he hired the butcher. Then they find out Mary's dead, and they go back to the mansion. They speak to Christian. Going to all 3 of those locations and letting them do everything the same and saying, okay, you arrived at the mansion, is a very tiresome and frankly boring way to do it. So what I did is the first time they went to the mansion, okay, the second time I had him meet them outside the bar. Same character, same premise, but you add a little variety, switching up the description. And I originally had them going to his mansion, and I changed it, and I justified it back in my story of how you would know, but to add that diversity after answering those questions. And then the third time, they did go back to his house, but I changed the way it was told. I put the onus on me because I knew what they were going to say, and I knew that they were going to talk to him, and I wanted to, again, for time purposes, move through the scene. So asking those questions gave me the opportunity to say, okay, we want to vary this up a little bit. What's another way we can tell that information in a new way? So, composing scenes. The third step, outline objectives. But in the meantime, we've had a lot of questions, so let's see what's going on. Lots of talk about heat. Are all your game settings part of a greater multiverse? Yes. I kind of want a spy story now. Yeah, well, hey, we could do that. So Bob says horror, spy. We could do spy or heist. Bob says spy. Heist. Spy. Okay, that's enough. Let's just do spy. But it's going to be a campy spy game because I don't want it. Because the problem with a spy or a heist game is, again, it's very detail intrinsic, and I want to be able to craft an idea together. So spy, perfect. I'm going to write that down. And we're going to come back and we're going to go through these steps together quickly and sort of talk about what we're going. Tim's at 70%. Hey, Tim, by the way. I want a horror heist story with spies. I would do horror, but you know what? I love horror, and I think we just did 3 games of horror, so I think we'll try to find a middle ground. Spy, like I don't want to do serious spy, like maybe more like Archer, or like Austin Powers even, but not too silly because Siege and Arrow is really silly. Call of Cthulhu is like on this end of the spectrum, and Siege and Arrow is like on this end of the spectrum. So let's try to get here, closer to funny than horror. But okay, I want to ask Harlan any more questions since you won't answer them, but maybe I can ask you guys instead. All right, let's look up because Mark feels left out. Mark's questions. Besides Call of Cthulhu is awesome. Maybe hopefully they'll encounter some deities. I hope Harlan to do Call of Cthulhu. Don't see any questions here, bud. Are you asking about temperature? 88 degrees is Fahrenheit, 31 Celsius. Those are your questions. Google it. No, but I can tell you Celsius to Fahrenheit is double it and add 30. There's your way to find out the answer. So let's do that. Spy. Oh, Aisha, heist. Well, actually, you know, heist would be good, but because it's so detail intrinsic, I'll save it for another day. But maybe this will be, depending on how it goes, we'll do more of a continuation. I wasn't here for Ninja Space Pirates, so I don't know. Okay, so moving on. Part 3, or step 3, outline objectives. So each scene's objectives. So it isn't necessarily to have an objective in every scene, but you should have something to motivate them, you know? Like I mentioned, so they arrive at that farm. There's a barn, there's a house, and they enter the barn. Now we have the scene description. You break it down, you know, you enter the barn, there's streaks of light coming through, it's dim, you think you see something on the floor, whatever. What's their objective in the scene? What do you want as a GM? So maybe I want them to open that hatch on the floor, okay? And I detail that out. How can they approach that objective? Can they find it through perception? Can they find it because there's a smell coming from it? Can they find it from, you know, opening the door and turning on the lights, okay? Making it obvious. With a Call of Cthulhu game, it depends on how important your information is because you might need them to find it. But with any other game, typically I give 3 ways that they can find it. And if they can't find it after 3 ways, then they're kaput. You know, they break into an apartment to find a girl, but she's gone. So their objective is to find a piece of evidence. And let's say the piece of evidence is a note she left under the bed. So the first way would be a perception test, okay? The note under the bed, if they can spot it, you know, weirdly enough. The second would be maybe they get the sense, an idea roll. The third might be that there's a broken lamp with glass, and that would maybe lead them under. Again, maybe not a perception or spot hidden, maybe, or an idea, but maybe or maybe there's a scent on it, perfume. So there you go. I don't think there's smell roll in Call of Cthulhu. There's listen rolls, but so you give them 3 ways to tackle the objective. And if there's no, that's just my way. You don't have to do 3. Some people say 1 and you're done. But I'm not big on super punishing of the players. And detailing what your objective is in the scene. Again, not every scene needs an objective. You know, if you enter that barn, they could just exit the other side. But then the question I would ask is, why are you detailing that scene? You know, why are you giving them the option to walk into a barn and describe the scene? And if truly your intention is purely just to add flair to the game, I'd consider not doing it. And it's not necessarily that flair isn't nice, it's just it can bog down the gameplay and make them feel like they're just listening to you talk. And I know, believe me, I can be bad on that too. But ultimately, it's not going to add anything to the game if they don't have a purpose to be there. So again, once you've done your objectives, ask your questions. Do I have things for them to do? Is the objective arbitrary or is it important to the story? Do I have a plan if they don't find it? Is this story dependent on X, Y, Z happening? You know, understanding where this objective lies. And as I showed you in the part 1 of the story, there was an element that said must find twine. And because regardless of what happened in that first scene at the mansion, they needed to find that twine because that's what would bring them to their next clue, to Edwin's bar, and that's what would progress the story. And if they hadn't found that, then it would have been a standstill. And with Call of Cthulhu, it's tough because sometimes you need to spoon feed them. I think Trial of Cthulhu has a better way of doing that, But so long as you're aware of what needs to be done, you can do it in a pretty convincing way. Or give them multiple ways to find that same objective. That also works. So, story, compose scenes, outline objectives. The fourth step of 6 for this is a game prep. This is your game prep. Is creating contingencies and planning for the unknown. Probably the most frustrating thing about running any game ever, in my opinion. Oh, Mark did have a question. I asked if a story for an RPG game is hard to come up with. Like, do you have to plan it out or make it up as you go along? This video is literally about planning out a game. So, hopefully that answers that. That being said, you don't have to. There are systems that if you want to be really loose and with the game, absolutely. End of the World is very loose when it comes to that, and that's by the system's design, and that's by the way that we try to tend to play it, keeping it open-ended, letting them have these ideas. But in that case, what I would do is not write a story, but still have scenes, encapsulated ideas that have miniature objectives. Because if you're making everything up on the fly again, you can really poke holes in it. And once the validity of your world begins to crumble, once your PCs can start saying that there are errors, oh, you said this and then this and this, if they start to pile up, then essentially you've lost your ability to GM effectively, or convincingly, I should say, because at that point I wouldn't trust anything you say, and that's when you start getting players doubting you. You'd be like, well, hold on. You said 5 minutes ago that the door was metal. Now it's wood because the fire is eating through it because it's convenient for you. And once you've lost that trust, especially if I'm a PC or something like that, I do tend to think, well, then, if that can be fudged to benefit you, maybe this table can be, turned over so I can crouch behind it. So it gets tough. So completely GMing on the fly, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, only because of that. If it's a very loose game that really has no bearing, and I would say not in a bad way, and mainly not in a bad way because he's here right now, but Chris's game, Rolling for Shoes, is a system designed for that sort of play, and that's okay, because it's okay if you poke holes in that, because it's more of a collaborative story game than it is a typical adventure that you're playing through. Those games are fine. Those games are absolutely fine. But it's really tough to create a campaign from games like that. The minute you do a second episode, you really have to remember what you said, or you do it episodically. So I hope that answers your question. Lauren says, it seems that sometimes you plan ahead with one of the guys to have something specific happen. How do you do that? Do you tell them to get to here, make this happen without giving too much info to spoil the story? Or did Mycl already know that the Witch's Mark would end that way? Hope that made sense. I wasn't sure how to word it. No, I totally understand where you come from. Absolutely. There are certain points where myself, mainly just me, I will message the guys and just say, hey, wait here, or skip to the other one. Prime example, in Call of Cthulhu, when they found the twine, I messaged them. I think I said, head to Edwin's bar. He's the guy who looks into this. Now, is that the true form of role-playing? No. That is in part because we live stream and we're trying to make a show that's relatively interesting and quick. And it's really tough to put absolute onus on the players to continue moving a complex story along. So no, that's not the ideal way to do it. But there are cases where messaging, in my opinion, is totally wanted and warranted. For instance, in Justin's last game, Drag of Cthulhu, no, Dragon Age Heroes, there were times where he'd message us and say, riff for a minute, but end being pissed off at your dad, or something like that. And so we know, he has a goal in mind, perhaps, because he wants to link this into his dad, or he's like, don't go too far, or something like that. And to me, those are more restrictions when it comes to our sort of show, rather than a role-playing restriction. If I was sitting around the table, it's very unlikely I'd be like, hey, just wait there. So, yes, on our side, it does come. With Mycl and Call of Cthulhu, all I told him at the end was, whatever you choose to do, sit down and have a cigarette at the end of it. That's all I told him. Because when I made that trailer, my intention was, it doesn't matter who, whether Chris lives to the end and tries to kill Christian and succeeds, whether they hire the butcher to kill Christian and succeed, whether they go to kill Christian and Christian kills them and they succeed, regardless of those, whoever ended would sit down and smoke a cigarette. So was it sort of fudged in a way? No, because they truly had any option they wanted for that to fit. I just crafted that so it could appear any way I wanted to, but that was, again, by design. Good question, though. I think Mycl and Chris did a great job in Witch's Mark, but I don't want to give away any spoilers. Well, that's fair. Dom's here. Yes, Discord is our new chat system, so use it. Speaking of being believable, I don't think Harlan has elbow patches. Well, joke's on you. I'm not wearing... They're rolled up. How'd you handle Alex in the first call through the same vein of questioning his control of his character? I told Alex from the get-go, I said, look, what I truly said with Alex was, we're playing Call of Cthulhu, would you like to join? He said, I can only join for a few. I said, that's fine, I will kill you off. And then he said, okay. And I said, actually, let's make you a bad guy and they can kill you off. And he said, perfect. And then it was a pre-written death because he had to leave. So, yes, a little of the mystery gets revealed there. The only action professor I've had wearing a leather jacket, so I don't know. Bjorn, Indiana, and Jones. Oh. Aisha asks Lauren when she's going to hop into community game. I agree. Noob GM, how did it take you to feel comfortable GMing and find your own style? Is that for me? I'm not sure. I'm going to ask a question mark. I don't know what question mark is, so I'm going to use that symbol. Okay, so step 4, creating contingencies and planning for the unknown. And again, like I said, this is very difficult to do, and it's tough to do 24/7. But in cases where you strongly believe that your PCs might do something different, it's always a good idea to have something as a back burner. And as you saw when I showed you my documents, I had optional. So if they decided to go off the path, you know, what would change? How would it change the game? How would it change the story? You know, is this evidence super important? And if it is there another way they can find it? Oftentimes with Call of Cthulhu, I'll have 2 or 3 ways to get the same message. You'll remember, again, if you saw it, when they went to the girl's room, they found a piece of paper that had a sort of a translated note on it. And they never bothered translating, but had they did, it would tell them something relatively redundant to what they found in another part of another episode. So it wasn't purposely redundant. It was there as sort of a backup if that second episode never came or if they never went that route. But again, multiple ways to finding information is great. Global contingencies are sort of a last-ditch effort. If something gets totally derailed and you really need them to get back on track, having a global contingencies, and look, we've all done it. Whether a GM admits it or not, they have. A tornado that pops up overnight, or you get turned around and then you're back to where you want to be. It's just unfortunate because sometimes that happens, especially with players like myself who can be difficult and want to go off on their own. You know, having global contingencies, like, there's nothing wrong with that, because what all you're trying to do is get them on a path to be doing the best adventure for what they're going to be interested in, and telling the story together. And again, after creating those contingencies, you know, do I have enough planned should they go completely off track? You know, is this contingency more interesting than my main story, and do I have a way out? Oftentimes I'll create contingencies, you know, if they go into this building instead of this building. And oftentimes, you know, I'll have the main story if they went to the building, and then I have a contingency where they can't, if they went in that building, there'd be a monster in the walls. And I'll go, that actually might be more interesting. And then I'll switch them. Because sometimes you accidentally fall upon things that are more clever. 5, creating separate encounters. And this is important too, and it's sort of that web style that I was talking about. We have scenes, you know, the idea of these are the scenes that they are going to follow. Within them are the descriptions and the objectives that each scene is going to have if they have an objective. Contingencies based on what happens if they go off. And then separate encounters, which is more branches off. And these are set up, again, similar to that optional, that might lead back or might have time. And these I create typically if they are going quickly or if they're going, you know, off track too much. And they're just sort of bridges. You saw one of the optional ones was a woman who was very thin. And at the beginning, if they were ready to go right away, I would have had her knock on the door instead of Sammy to sort of fill in the gaps between moving to their next scene. And finally, and asking your questions, of course, to those as well. You know, will they be too distracted by this? What does this dilute my game? By adding an optional encounter, Like that stray dog in Call of Cthulhu. They walked to the thing. They were getting there a bit quickly. I wanted to slow them down a little bit. So I just created a small thing about a drunk guy and a stray dog where he threw up on him. It was a bit of entertainment. It was a bit of fun. And it was, in my opinion, sort of the perfect middle ground. If you create an optional encounter or a separate encounter that's too interesting, that can be a pitfall, because what happens is they think that's part of the main story, or they might just, care more about that than anything else. And they're like, oh, we need to figure out what's wrong with that dog. So that's dangerous too. But having that there to speed up or slow down the game or just keep it interesting is always good. And then finally, step 6, the end game. You've written your story. You've created your scenes. You've outlined your objectives. You've created your contingencies, and you've had separate backup encounters. Endgame is the 6th step. And this is where you need to ask yourself, is there a solution? Do I have a closing in mind? Is it achievable? Now, not all games need to have a solution. They don't all need to have a closing in mind. They don't all need to be achievable. But the best ones do. And the only tip I can ever give to this, and this is story, game, whatever, and I always strive for this, and it's not always accomplished, but I always love to keep the idea of wowing them in the end. And that goes with everything in life. Wow them in the end. If you can wow someone in the end of a story, of a game, of a date, of whatever you're doing, it is the best way to stay memorable in every sense of the word. So, if you have a game and you have an idea, really try to work towards an ending. It's frustrating when the ending doesn't come to fruition, and Deadlands was very much that. Alex threw us off rails right at the end. And Chris is very true to GM style, traditional style. He essentially said, okay, whatever you have to do, we're going to do it. We're going to move on from that. I don't think I would have been as generous. I think I would have fudged something so that we can continue moving on, because to me, having that final is so important. So, and again, asking those questions. Will they feel accomplished in the end? Is that by choice? Does this story have a solution? And is that by design? Oftentimes you might not have a solution, and that's your choice. But ultimately, every scenario should have a solution, because at that point, then you're just sort of abusing them. And if you're creating a no-win scenario like I do, then you're a very mean GM. And that is game prep. So again, just some last-minute details, general tips and rules. Try to avoid similar scenes. The example was Christian being in the car outside of Edwin's rather than going back to the mansion. Have it make sense when it needs to be. Have a story, so if they poke holes, where those holes, how they could be filled. Have various ways to tackle an objective, because they might not think the way you want them to think. Give the players a clear direction. It avoids aimless wandering. And again, that might be your prerogative, but that's not the way I run games. To me, they need to know where they have to go. And there's railroading, but that's another discussion. Try to cater to each type of player. I mean, it's tough, but oftentimes diversifying, is a doable thing. What I try to do, and I did it for Call of Cthulhu, is when Chris and Mycl send me their character sheets, or whoever sends me the character sheets, I will pick their top 3 stats, and I will put them at the top of each game and try to cater to those stats. Now, it was tough, because this last game, both Chris and Mycl had similar top stats. They both had spot hidden. They both had investigation and firearms or something. But they both had very similar stats. So it was easier to cater to last game. But cater to those stats, Doesn't mean they're going to succeed every time, but it means that you are sort of being conscious of the characters they're trying to play. And then finally, wow them in the end. Try to end strong as you possibly can, because that's the thing that's going to hopefully make them think it's a memorable game. When all that's done, you're going to start, do you understand your world? Do you understand your NPCs? Does your story make sense? Is it too obvious? Is it too easy? Is it too hard? And is it interesting? Ask yourself those questions. Now, only because I mentioned it, I do want to discuss the idea of railroading and absolute freedom. And this is just, I got to preface this is totally my opinion. But in my opinion, games with absolute freedom, they rely heavily on the players and how active they are and their decisions. And oddly enough, it lends itself more to quarterback players, because it requires a strong PC presence to define what that story is going to be. And unless you have a very fair group of PCs that are more than happy to work together. It's difficult to try to wrangle them so that there's sort of equal shared time. You know, and ultimately because of that, they can be boring if you're sort of just walking around. And yeah. But don't confuse story-driven games with railroading, because they are totally different. And I like to think of it like a sandbox. You know, there are sort of the three ways, and a video game is the best example. You know, Minecraft has a setting, but it's completely open. And this is still a story-driven game. You know, it has something that's in there, and it's completely open. That's not the way I run my games. Most of my games, I would say, End of the World is like that, or The Strange was sort of a bit of that. You have your world, you have the way you can do things, but your story is your own. Then you have more Grand Theft Auto, which is a story, a setting, and it's relatively limited. You know, you have a finite boundary. And within that, you can do whatever you want, but there's still a story that you want to follow. And that's typically how I try and how most of my games go. Now, the middle bits in Grand Theft Auto, when you're running around doing whatever the hell you want, I try to trim out because we do it live. But in truth, if my Call of Cthulhu games were on the table, it would be Grand Theft Auto to a T, allowing them to run from place to place. And these guys, before we ever went on stream, you know, when I ran Call of Cthulhu for them, I think they'll attest to that. You know, there were many times where I'd let them go check out a lead, even though I know it's not going anywhere, and hopefully have something sprinkled in interesting there. Now it's a bit more trimmed because, again, we're trying to make a show. And then the last one is sort of Call of Duty, which is railroading. It's on a path. It's a very tight story, but there's no choice. You move forward. It can be entertaining, and I would say me, above all the other guys, tend to fall into this category the most. I try my best not to do it, but sometimes it does. More micro aspects fall into that. But that's not, in my opinion, role-playing either. So the one end of the spectrum is the Minecraft, the other end of the spectrum is Call of Duty, and I always try to aim right in the middle. And I think that, to me, is sort of the golden area. Again, the pros is, you know, the Minecraft is the true role-playing in a sense. It's true to life. You know, there's no real conclusions. It's more punishing. The failures are more punishing. There's less escape routes. But at the same time, there's less escapism. I find when you go into those games, it takes a lot of you as a player to sort of stay focused on what's at hand and take notes and make sure that you're following every aspect of it. Otherwise, you don't have a story to follow. The Grand Theft Auto has a story and a setting, and there are limits. You know, you can't kill certain characters. You go beyond the boundaries. But I feel like it offers a more rewarding story, while at the same time giving the players the right amount of freedom so that they feel like they can be doing things. And they did. In Call of Cthulhu, the whole last episode started with a torture. And they were attached to these chairs and their fingernails. The only reason the butcher happened, the only reason that existed, was because the previous episode they confronted Christian about hiring the butcher. They said, they said something like, why don't you hire the butcher to find the girl? And it's funny because in character, me as the GM, I hadn't planned for that. And I kind of thought, well, I guess, okay, you could. And what happened behind the scenes is Christian went home, he called the butcher, and he said, find the girl. And the butcher went to the spot, tried to find her, couldn't, saw that these two guys had connected something, and tortured them. So the only reason he existed to torture them was because they gave Christian the idea to hire him to find Mary. So, did it... And I guess the problem is, when you're trying to craft a story like that, it's tough to communicate sometimes with the players that their freedom didn't affect the game because you want to keep a mystery. But in that case, there was a prime example of how something small ended up changing a very detailed story. But to their benefit, it just didn't seem like it. Sometimes that's fun, trying to keep it sneaky like that. So, we're making a spy story, is what we've decided. The genre is spy. The themes, I want to keep it silly and light, but I'm thinking the theme for a spy story, I guess we said heist, eh? So let's do that. So we're going to do a spy story. The theme is going to be heist. The feelings, okay, spy, heist, what kind of feelings? Maybe like escalation, maybe like something like pressure. Oh, under the clock. Oh, okay. We're going to do this it's going to be pressure is going to be the feeling. Because I think what we're going to do, and I'm just coming up with this using what we just went over on the fly. And this is going to be Wednesday's game. So I'm thinking what we're going to do is we're going to do like a time game. It's going to be a bit silly, but it's going to be the spy heist game where maybe they start off and they're like strapped to chairs or something. and they're like captured. And I'm thinking the beginning of Quantum of Solace, you know, when they get, he's nuts, not the beginning, but when that scene where he's like being tortured. So we'll have them being tortured, and it's gonna be like, you'll need to get the suitcase from this place or whatever. That's gonna be our story. The hook. Well, there's our hook. Suitcase. Oh, we just did a suitcase, didn't we? Okay, no. What's a better hook? Something that needs to be stolen. Fuck it. Let's just say suitcase for now. Global objective will be, again, stealing the suitcase from a vault. Locations. Oh, you know what? I love the idea of like an Alp, a mountainside. So let's do like the Alps. In Hitman, the video game, there's this episode where you're up in the Alps and it's like a spa. So let's just steal that. So we'll do like a spa. I like that. I like a spa up in the Alps, and it's like high security. So that'll be funny. And they'll have to get down. Okay, so that's one location. So again, just so we're on the same page. The genre is spy. Theme. So genre, spy. Themes, heist. Feelings, pressure. Hook, the suitcase. Global objectives, crack the vault, I guess, or steal the suitcase. Location, we're going to do Alps, and then NPCs is last. What else? I'm going to do Alps. I'm going to do spa. I'm going to do like mountainside. You know, it'd be funny if they started off like needed to get Sherpas up the mountains. So this is what's going to start off. It's going to start off with like a mountain cabin, I think. Mountain cabin, and then we'll do like a Sherpa guide, which will be funny. I'll make like a funny character, which will be NPCs. Then they'll get up to the spa, and they'll have like reservations. And then when they get and then we'll do like the high security area, which would be another location. And then when they get the suitcase, they'll have to escape on ATVs. ATVs? Not ATVs. Snowmobiles. Snowmobile escape, which would be funny. And that'll probably encompass 3 hours, because you know what? The mountain cabin, that'll probably be about 30 minutes. The Sherpas, that'll be 10. When they get to the spa, that'll be about 30 minutes, like to get acquainted there. And that'll be the mid game. And then the actual vault breakout will be 30. The snowmobile escape will be 30. And then maybe I'll pepper in something else halfway through, just so you guys don't know exactly what's going to happen. And then NPCs. So I want to do a Sherpa. I don't know how it'll sound yet. I can't practice now because it'll probably be a bit racist. And I want to do a concierge, like at the front desk of the spa. I know it's not like a typical thing that you'd have, but I wanted this like really snooty British, you didn't have a reservation, something like that, which will be funny. And bodies in the sauna. Oh, hide bodies if they kill them? Deal. Okay, we'll do that too. Hide bodies. Oh, you know what would be funny? If they just keep killing people. That would be good. So we'll have them like killing people as well. Oh, and I want their contact. Oh, right. And we're starting off with them being tortured. So we'll start off with torture. And it'll be a Russian guy. Russian. Yes, tell us what you need. And it won't be like, you know, they won't understand him or something. So there we go. Spy, heist, pressure, suitcase, vault, Alps. To torture, mountain climber with the Sherpa, then the spa with the reservations, then a high security area, a vault, escape on snowmobiles, right into a helicopter. That'll be the game. And there we go. There's our story. Easy fucking peasy. And what I'll do on my own time then is I'll create the scenes. I'll have each of those scenes done out. I'll do an outline of objectives, what each scene's going to do. So for instance, at the mountain climbing area or the mountain cabin area, you know, it'll be like contacting the Sherpa. Maybe I'll have like 10 Sherpas. And they won't know which. It'll be like something with a spy. You know, it'll be like the one you have has like hair on his, I don't know, 10 contingencies. This one will have to have full of contingencies. Separate encounters. We'll do a little other things like that. And then end game. And we'll end some sort of wow. Maybe the helicopter will blow up or something like that. So there we go. So all we need is a name. So let's everyone give their idea for a name. And if you like a name, give it like a thumbs up. And the one with the most thumbs up, we will name the RPG that. But let's go short, not like The Great Adventure, something that's no more than 3 words. You know, I always like The Witch's Mark or Call of Cthulhu or something like that. So you guys give it a good name. Chris said, very different experience while streaming. We try to get somewhere in a short time, trim the fat, though we like around the table playing too, where we can get more straight up shit. Absolutely. And we're probably going to do a game pretty soon. The Butcher is a force of nature. When I play around the table, I go impulsive very quickly. This format. True. We all do. Wouldn't mind seeing you guys play Arkham Horror Mansion of Madness sometime. Possibly. We Make Shit Spy Story Edition. Feeling second chance to prove ourselves. Oh, that's not bad at all, eh? It's a high story, grocery story, three amigos, kind of funny. Well, I don't know who's going to be playing this game. It might just be Alex and David, or Alex and Michael, weirdly enough. So it'll be an interesting dynamic. Bodies. Probably just body. Torture chair seems to be an overarching theme through Harlan's game. Yeah. Well, I've never had a torture chair up until the last 2 games. Have some cute, unsuspecting old tourists. Perfect. Old tourists. Let's do that. That's funny. I don't want to do kids because I feel like I use kids too much. Invictus Spy. That's good. Sherpa enough. The Burn Job. Cold Vault. Ninja Space Pirates. Spy Hard. Operation Sherpa. I like Cold Vault. That's pretty good. Keep going. I want to hear a bunch and then vote on the best. Okay. So there we go. That is game prep. And we prepped a game together. So now you know exactly how it feels to be this loose and unplanned with games. Now you know why the games sometimes are pretty crazy. The next subject in today's classroom is called RPG etiquette. RPG etiquette is... it's a touchy subject. Most of us play with our friends or family, and it can be difficult to talk about things that are bothering you, or talk about things that you that you want to work on. And I'm very lucky. All 4 of us are very lucky that between us we've had issues in the past, but we've been very good, and obviously being friends is great. So we've worked together at coming up, or I should say overcoming any sort of obstacles that we might have had. But it's always difficult with RPG etiquette. So honestly, I think when it comes to problems, it comes from the source. And we're going to talk about how to deal with problem players in a minute. But really, there are general tips to keep in mind when you are having issues, or I should say before you even play. But they're not global tips, and I think this is where it's a bit different. Oftentimes people think, it's like, be nice to the table. And it's not that easy, because I think they're specific for GMs and they're specific for players. And it depends on what situation they're doing. So, if you're a GM and you're dealing with players in any of your circumstances, be fair. That's the golden rule. And when in doubt, or when you're not sure, use dice. The fate dice are perfect. We use them all the time. They're plus and minus. If you're not sure whether a gun would be loaded with bullets, roll a die. Because ultimately, you always want to make the PCs feel like they're being heard and they're being fair. And that's really the golden rule with GMs. Be flexible with your players. In real life problems and in-game choices, that means don't just be fair with them or be flexible with them in the game. Be flexible with them in real life. If they need time off, if they can't make it to a stream. This is the number one thing I hear on the stream. This is why I'm talking about this. So many people say, my player's commitment is just out. It's out the door. And you know what? That's what happens. No one, and I can sincerely say this, if someone does not want to play the game, don't make them play the game. I've had enough people in my life, Alex's wife, not to name names, but she doesn't like games very much. And, in the early days, because we are big gamers, tried to include her, and she just doesn't enjoy it. There's nothing worse than trying to get someone to play something when they're not feeling it, because it's not fun. So be flexible. If they need time off, or if they just don't want to play anymore, then that's okay. It's okay to not want to play. Be sure as a GM. Don't make wishy-washy calls. If you make a call, stick to it. And that's not to say you can't take the time to think about what the solution might be, but don't backtrack. Don't say one thing, the door is wood, and then later go say, actually, you know what? No, it was. If you didn't take the time to think about it, then take the time next time. Work towards the interests of your players without catering towards them, or catering to them. And that's a really tough line to walk. Because there's a big difference between catering to them, and working towards their interests. Catering to them is, creating situations where they're going to win and they're going to always be on top. But working towards their interests is, and like I mentioned with game prep, having the top 3 skills that these guys can do, and trying to work those into the campaign. With the first Call of Cthulhu campaign, Frank Underhill was a mechanic. So oftentimes I tried to bring in mechanical options for them to solve a similar problem. Had these guys had that, mechanical option would have been one of the first ways to disarm the bomb. It was a solution, but unfortunately it wasn't the first one I mentioned because they just didn't have great roles for that. But without catering to them, you're not trying to get them to win every situation by crafting ways that they solve. If they're great with math problems, don't put in a math problem just because that's what they do. And it's a fine line to walk. And one of the best examples I can think of it recent was in Dragon Age. No, it was in Dragon Age 2. Justin, we were playing a game and it was a very talkative episode, and Justin was saying something along the lines of how to involve Pent, and I said, I said to Justin, I said, let me try to craft this scene, and I said, I think I challenged Pent to a bar fight. I was like, it has to be a fight to cater to his interests in character. And Justin and Chris are great for doing this. I only mentioned that one because it's one that came to mind for me. I wasn't trying to pat myself on the back. But catering towards their interests is never good. But working towards their interests is definitely doable, and it's something that's going to make them feel involved. Try to create an interesting story hook. And this goes back to game prep. Be critical of yourself. Something that's going to be enough to really, really keep them interested. Be fallible. It's okay to make mistakes. And again, this is a GM to your players. Make mistakes. If the players catch you, welcome it. If they say, well, I don't know if this is in this. Okay, no, fair enough, totally fair. Because nope, not in it. Nope. Kevin Bacon wasn't in Footloose. It's not going to help anything. Allow the story to change, and I am very bad with this, I will admit. But working with the PCs to find the middle ground. Draft Askew, Deadlands were great examples of this. Strange in small part, but allowing the story to grow with where they're going is so important. Listen to the characters that your PCs are trying to create. And this goes right back to our core, creating those PCs. Again, the GM, you write a story, and they roleplay it. But listen to the characters they're trying to create. If they're trying to work towards an evolution of a character, they're not just following the lawful good spectrum or whatever bullshit that might be, but they're making changes, work towards them. Don't pigeonhole them. Oh, no, you're playing a paladin. Paladins aren't allowed to be lawful good. No, that's not role playing. That's sticking someone in a 2-dimensional box. Let them grow. Good characters grow. That's the easiest way to put this. Good characters grow across the board. And I'm not saying that in an attacking way. I'm just saying that in real life. A child grows and changes as they do. And if an adult doesn't grow, they probably should. Allow PCs to contribute to the story and the world. Great example is Justin's Dragon Age Heroes campaign, where he would come to us and say, describe how you woke up, describe how the stone building looks. Allow the PCs to especially when it comes to the frilly text. It's so easy for them to do it. Describe your character's death is something that we do across the board in Invictus, or describe how you kill that guy. Give them a way to be creative. Accept feedback. Post-game discussions are so important. We try to do them whenever we can. Talk about what they liked about that game, but be fair as well. And that will be when the PCs talk to the GM. But as the GM to the PCs, accept post-game feedback. Your word is law, but that doesn't mean that you can't be diplomatic about it. And there's a word called Irish diplomacy, which is the ability to tell a man to go to hell so that he looks forward to the trip. And I think that's the best way that I can put it. Say that this is what's going to happen. This is the way I do it. But say it in a way that doesn't feel like an attack. Say it in a way that comes to the point of it. Don't punish the PCs for in real life issues. This is so important. Punish the PCs for their choices. That's just rule 1. Punish PCs for PC choices, but don't punish them for in real life choices. And I mention that because it happens more often than you can tell, or more often than you know. You're annoyed and it just rubs you the wrong way. Never make it personal. And if you're not having fun, take a break. Those are GMs dealing with players. Next, players dealing with the GM. But first, there's some questions. So let's Talk to the class. Everyone's raising their hands. Okay, so let's see. It looks like Coldfinger is the winner, and I like it. So, David Johns, you have named the next game Coldfinger. Oh man, I should get a theme. Coldfinger. Oh, I love From Switzerland with Love and Cold Vault. Coldfinger. I didn't catch the beginning. Is Harlan going to post bullet notes on all these topics later? Maybe. We'll see. There's going to be a test, so. Aisha, I have notes if he doesn't. Well, there you go. Yeah, then I'll probably post them. When are we going to see the return of Revenant? Revenant is the best game for, like, really last-minute games. So when there is a drop, like when I get thrown into the mix, you know, it's like, oh, I can't run tomorrow's game, please take it. Revenant will come back. So, only because that's literally why Revenant was designed. I was like, I need a game that you guys help with, that takes almost zero prep from me, so that if on Tuesday night someone's like, we need you to run the game tomorrow, I can do something. So, but when it comes to like this where I have a few days, I like to create new stories. I just think people would enjoy a written version. Yeah, you know what? Then I'll post them. No problem. Harlan, what's your opinion on pre-writing some of your PC's backstories? Personally, it really depends on the scenario. For Call of Cthulhu 1, I wrote all of the backstories because I wanted them to. Each one of my campaigns, as we talked about, have themes and feelings. The theme of the first Call of Cthulhu campaign really was, well, I guess it was more choices. It was more like questions because each player had a question that they were asked, and it was, you know, would you change your mind, or do you? I can't remember now. But I wanted it to be intrinsic to the story, their characters, which was really important and tough to do when you give the players the ability to do that. It was something I wanted to try new, to be honest, as well. But I don't feel like there's any problem with it, so long as the players are okay with it. As a player, one of the best feelings is being able to create your own person and put your feelings and power into that. So long as you're not abandoning that or taking that away from them, then I say absolutely. But if you're taking that away from them, then no. I mean, that's the benefit of being a player. Who's getting the cold finger? Cold finger. Gotta be a song there. Okay, so all those are ways as a GM dealing with players. But as a player dealing with a GM, and this happens probably for most of us, number one, respect the GM. They put so much work into the story that you are working on. I mean, you just saw us go through all the steps of game prep, and that's just from the GM. So respect it. Listen to them, but, well, I guess I should say respect the GM, because the second is respect the story. Add to it, but also understand that this is the GM's tale to tell. And a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people say, well, no, look, it's my story too. But the truth is, when it comes down to it, just as in real life, you have the way to change the story of your own life. You go to work, you want to jut up north, absolutely. But oftentimes I find that very few people will take the same amount of importance that they would in a real life decision with an in-game decision. If you truthfully played an RPG the way you would in real life and made every careful step into a haunted mansion, as detailed and as important as you would in real life, then absolutely, it is your story to tell. But the problem is, that's not the case. And more often than not, you'll go bursting through a door and without really thinking about it, because there's no real consequences. You'll die, but most of the time, if you're playing a one-off, it's not really that important to live. Or you just want to have fun. So respect the story. Like I said, add to it, but understand it's really their tale to tell. Listen to the GM. When they describe scenes or scenarios, and I will openly admit Alex is the worst for this. I gotta say, like 4 or 5 times. I can say because it's my brother. We've gone to Deadlands was the worst, because Chris would go into great elaborate detail, and then Alex would ask a question that literally was just answered, and he just did it in Siege and Arrow too. But he's very bad with that. So listen to the GM, because it's frustrating when you put a lot of work and detail into what you're doing, and the person's not listening at all. Ask questions. Ask about the scene. Ask about the world. The GM created this, and they're more than happy to talk about it, and it gives you a better understanding of what's going on. Poke holes in it if you need to. That's the fun. Take notes. it's great to take notes. It shows you're listening, and I think it's great because every single game that we play, I take notes. Whether it be something simple, like Siege and Arrow, where all I wrote down was evil, ominous sound, and a few names as they came up. You know, it's always good to take notes. This one is so important for around the table games. Put your phone away. And this goes to everyone here. And this one's just it's non-negotiable. This is obvious. If you play games with anybody, put your phone away. It's not hard. It's so disrespectful. And you know what? I will say I've been bad for it. Mycl's been very bad for it. I think Mycl to this day still does it sometimes. So if you're watching this, Mycl, shame on you. But put your phone away. In this day and age, it's tough enough to get everyone's attention. So if you're playing a game with somebody, respect the GM. It's so easy to do it. Make a character you'll enjoy playing, and worry about stats secondary. And that's not to say, because I know we've had this discussion before about playing a character that's in line with your thinking. No, that's not what I'm saying. Play a character you enjoy playing. If it's a challenge to yourself, then absolutely fair enough. But don't play a character based on its stats. You know, don't decide that you want a beef, like a beef, I was gonna say beefcake, a strong, soldier character, and then worry about the character itself second. To me, that's totally against the idea of role playing. Role playing, you're playing a role. Create a character that you're interested in playing, that you want to tell the story of, that you want to grow, or you want to, examine who they are. And then worry about where the stats would fit in. And oftentimes, yeah, that might come to bite you in the ass. But if you're playing with a GM that has the same idea of putting the story and the players first, then stats really shouldn't be that big of an issue. And that's where this entire video takes a different approach to most role playing. Because other role playing games are very much, well, pick your class and pick this and this. And I always say pick class last because it's the least important thing in my mind. Don't make it personal. Leave issues at the door. If you're having a fight with somebody, the minute you're starting, you drop it. You move forward. Read the room. Alex is also very bad for this. If the GM is crouching towards the candlelight in the room and looking at each of you and describing, the woods look like they're leaning in towards you, and then you say, my character farts. Is it funny? Sure. But you know what? The GM is obviously trying to build towards something. Read the room. If it seems like there's sort of a nice lull or something's trying to build, respect it. And I gotta say, this goes hand in hand with the listening, when you're describing a scene. Because if you're sort of just shitting on what the GM's trying to build, then it's not really fair. And then finally, and this one is a tough one, because it's going to come back in a second too, but take it seriously. And what I mean by taking it seriously is, or a better way to put it, I would say, is follow the GM's tone and act accordingly. Joking is fantastic. It is so great. And look, there's nothing more frustrating than someone sitting at the table and saying, no, you must take everything seriously, which is why this one's going to come back in a second. But it's also very difficult when you're dealing with someone who is not taking an ounce of the game seriously. And you need to be able to at least follow the world. So there's two sides to that coin, and we're going to talk about the other side. But for now, we're going to say, take it seriously. Respect the game, respect the players. And when you sit down, be ready to give it a fair shot. All right, so that's a player dealing with players. As a player dealing with a player. And this is tough, because I'm probably the worst for it. Try not to monopolize the talking. And yes, I am bad, because I definitely do monopolize the talking. But I try, and that's the important thing. And I am aware of my issue, because, at least in more campaigning games, I'll often say, well, you take this one, or you talk to this person, or whatever, more in chat than in real life. But there's other games I care less. In Siege and Arrow, no, I'm going to continue talking, because that's how Arrow is as well. But try not to monopolize. Encourage others to take a shot at something. Say, oh, here, you try this, or you do the spot hidden roll, or you do the listen roll, which can go hand in hand. Sometimes it can be frustrating, because you might be, it's sort of like, when someone's at a stoplight and they're like, oh yeah, you go. And you're like, no, you go, and it keeps going back and forth. Player dealing with the player. Those are just two of them. We're going to touch on a few others in a second, but I want to move on to sort of the context of it. And this is where these two aspects are really important. As a veteran GM or player, these are tips and RPG etiquette points to think about if you're a veteran. And it's really important because I think this is what gets ignored the most. You know, it's really easy to say, respect the GM, respect the players, respect this, listen to this, listen to this. But 99% of the time, that's coming from veterans. And they're talking down to people. And they're saying, look, you need to respect the story. So this goes out to the veterans, which I include myself in. And for the veterans, and this goes doubly so, this is GM or players, be fallible. You know, I've met so many people that are playing for 50 years or 20 plus years or whatever, and they act like they know it all, and you know, they'll say something wrong, or have an ego with what they're saying, right? You know, no, that's level 20 dungeon lizard, sorry, level 20 dungeon lizards, come on, man. You know, be fallible. And if you're not, you know, if you know you make no mistakes, maybe don't act like you make no mistakes. Don't be elitist. There is nothing more intimidating with this entire subsect of gaming than someone who than the impression of elitism. You know, the idea that you wouldn't understand, or the idea that you can't comprehend. And it's so important to really shrug off that bullshit, because that is what kills this hobby. You know, that's why I wasn't interested in this from the beginning. I got to be honest, because, and this goes all the way back to Mycl. I love Mycl, but I remember the first time I came up to Mycl and I played the game. And I never said this to him, but you know, he was telling me how to do it, and I was joking. And believe me, it's my fault too. I was kind of like, what's this? But I remember him rolling his eyes and being like, "Oh, that's your AC. I just told you that." And I asked it in sort of a foolish way, like, "What's the AC stand for, or whatever?" And he's like, "Armor class. I just told you this." And that wasn't necessarily elitism, but it definitely echoed what I had experienced previously. And again, I'm saying there is obviously fault here for me too, but it's so important to ensure that we as veterans don't communicate that way. Encourage others to try. And there's a very specific way to use this. So there's sort of a second part to this, and it's using stories. When I try to encourage people, in the same way I'll do with my son and the same way I'll do with any kids, is I tell a story. And I'll say, you know, okay, so you're at a party and it's a Halloween party. What did you dress up as? Oh, I dressed up as a devil. Okay, so you dressed up as a devil. And you're sitting at the snack bar, and a woman walks up to you and she's dressed as an angel, and she says, you know, funny, we must have gone together. What do you say back? You know, and you're a veteran. You know there's die rolls and there's detail and there's story, but you know what? At this point, just tell a story that they can sort of control. Give them a bit of power. And they say something along the lines of, oh, yeah, we could have done together or whatever. Suddenly there's a bang outside, and the place empties. And outside you see a car. The front seat is completely vacant. There's blood on the, you know, what do you do? So, you know, simple stories, hooks, strong hooks that make them interested. They don't have to be well thought out if they're introductory. Just do something that's going to get them thinking and talking and pretending that they're in that world. That's how you encourage new people. Use basic stories. I find one of the worst things when introducing new players is overwhelming them with the stats. You know, you sit down for D&D. Okay, so here's your character sheet. Mycl did up Siege and Arrow sheets for us, which was great, but they were 5 pages. And I've been playing for years, and I was like, what the is this? Like, there's like 6 pages here of like detail. And I couldn't imagine someone new to it being so overwhelmed with that. Now, some people like that. Some people come to the hobby because they love that sort of stats-oriented detail. And that's totally fine. But don't introduce it like that. To me, it's interactive storytelling. And if you start with that as a veteran towards a new player, there's nothing more interesting than just sort of doing that. Be inclusive. It's so important to just, you know, even the smaller kid. Most people that turn to role-playing, you know, they're a bit socially inept. There are people who they shy away from things like this. There's school, classrooms, and clubs and things like that. So they sometimes have difficulty talking to to other classes, or they want to be very stats driven. And that's why encouraging just the story side actually gives them more of a benefit, because you're in control of the story that you're telling, to the point where you can either stop someone who's trying to dominate or help someone who's failing. When you put it too much on roles, you have maybe a kid who's been very quiet, and he finally stands up and he takes a shot, and he misses, he rolls a natural one. There's nothing worse for your ego. And the kid who's talking the entire time and rolls a natural 20 and continues on his brigade. And in my opinion, from early ages, you don't need any of that. And this is where it comes back to the taking it seriously. As a veteran player, don't take it too seriously. If you're a new player, take it seriously. If you're a veteran, lighten up. Because, again, there's nothing worse than a new kid sitting down the table and you being like, you didn't roll the right die, or you don't know this. Make fun of yourself. As a veteran, it's okay to be silly, to sort of let others see that it's like, it's like anything. It's making friends. It's interacting with people. Be a bit self-deprecating with the way you talk about yourself. Understand that this is a silly hobby, and Mycl is so great for that, because Mycl's the first person. He'll dress up, and he's not the kind of guy who sits there and he's like, no, this garb is all natural. He knows it's goofy, but he leans into it, and that's the fun of it. So, veteran, those are your tips. As a newcomer, don't be intimidated. These people are all were at your stage at one point. Don't be afraid of these people. Take it seriously. And here's the other side of the coin. Don't make everything a joke. It's such reactionary. It's so natural when you're new to this hobby to sort of say, oh, no, this is stupid, this is dumb stuff. And it's okay to be embarrassed for certain aspects, but don't make fun of it, especially other people at the table. If someone is next to you dressed in that garb as Mycl and they're trying to be lighthearted and make him, don't say anything. You're gonna get outcast, even if you think it's silly, because believe me, in 10 years you'll be there too. And then be nice. With all of these, come on, be nice. At the end of the day, you're all there telling a story, hanging out, and trying to create something. So do it with a smile. Not taking it seriously is always an issue. Being a bad GM or a bad PC is always a difficulty. But with all of these things that have come up, I always try to come down to talk to them. If you can't talk to them, then you probably shouldn't be playing with them. And if you talk to them and they don't change anything, then yeah, ultimately they're probably not that good of a friend, and you can work past it in time, because there's really no sense in playing with people you despise. It's very much against the idea of the hobby. Okay, that is it for RPG etiquette. Next, we are going to be talking about creating memorable NPCs, our last subject for the day, but there's been a lot of questions and feedback, so I'm going to scroll up and we're going to read a bit of this. So we've decided on Coldfinger, which I'm totally down for. This Coldfinger, the spy who shagged me. Like and don't rest your head. What kind of software do you use for game planning, like GM Notes? I saw you use regular WordPress, or if you use anything else. Nope, I use Word. And you know what? When this ends, or not when this ends, but actually after I read these questions, I'll just show you another example of a game that we've done before, something that's less detail intrinsic, just so you can see again that format that I use. You played Vampire. Oh, there was a question, and I said, was that for me? And I didn't ask. Harlan, what's your opinion on... No, that wasn't the question. It was up. I think I asked, was that for me? Or no, I asked a question mark. Something about Kevin Costner, maybe? Whoever asked that question, I think it was MTB. Just ask that again, because I pinged it and then I forgot to ask, or I forgot to go back to it. I got distracted. Okay. Any position on people who play opposite gender, and are there some tropes you should avoid playing opposite gender to avoid obvious insults? Okay. First off, there's nothing wrong with playing the opposite gender. I firmly believe that. Because you're playing a role. If you're offensive about playing it, this is a very touchy subject, because obviously I find generally now socially the world can be very touchy about things like this. It's not to say that they're not right. It's not to say that there aren't valid reasons for people to feel this way. And I like to say that they have the moral high ground, but they sort of do it in a very off way. Morally, if someone plays a character and they're doing it offensively, yeah, they're morally right to be offended by that. But I guess it always comes down to the intention. Is the guy playing a girl, making fun of the girl purposefully, or is he doing it just in sort of a stupid way because he doesn't know any better? If his intention is to be malicious, then yeah, that's a different story, and I would probably say something. If the person is doing it and they're just trying to kind of understand how it works, then there's nothing wrong with it. And ultimately, I think it's on the onus of the person who's offended to really sort of dive into why. There's a great saying that just because you're offended does not mean you're correct, and I firmly believe that. Oftentimes, they are morally right, but that doesn't mean you're automatically right if you're offended. So explain your offense. If you're at a table and there's a man playing a female and you're offended, is it just because they're playing a female? Because then you're wrong. If they're playing it in a way that you feel is rude, then express that, and you could be wrong. If they're playing in a way that you feel could be rude and you express that and everyone else agrees, and the guy says, well, yeah, I hate women, then you're right. So it's sort of, it's a bit of a, there's multiple steps to it. But I think playing opposite gender is fantastic. Chris played Tamarack Moonshine in our Grimm campaign. He did it wonderfully. And I think Chris, to his credit, did it probably the best way. He didn't do anything different. He played a woman, but there wasn't anything over. He didn't change his voice. He didn't, wear pigtails. He just played a person. And I thought that was fantastic. So in my opinion, that's the way to do it. Because at the end of the day, yeah, there are differences, but not really all that much. The same goes with race or anything like that. I don't think there's anything wrong with playing a black character or anyone else of a different race, but if you're purposely trying to make racial traits different, then it can be a bit kind of questioning. Spiral asks, I remember you using Roll20 for the first Dragon Age, but stopped. What's your thoughts on those kind of encounters versus more dynamic, less structured ones? I like the more narrated ones you guys have used. Yeah, Roll20 we used once and abandoned it. I am not a fan of Roll20. To me, it works very much in line with the rules, stats, issues. And this just, again, it's how I GM, it's how I want to play. I'm not the kind of person who requires that, especially online. Now, around the table, Mycl builds beautiful buildings and things like that. Yeah, I like it, but that's because I get to see it. That's different. That's because I get to pretend that I'm there. It's not for the stats-driven, role-based attack of opportunity, are we flanked details. When it comes to online, I would never use it, because to me, anything can be explained if you're explaining it properly. Brianna here, you clearly love doing this. It's the same kind of passion I used to have before I got my master's degree. I want to get back there. Watching this is cathartic for me. Good. Well, hey, passion for everybody is good. Chris says, all good, all teams need a quarterback. Yeah, sometimes. And Jake says, not a baseball team. That's how I'm not supposed to understand. Mark says, the Invictus guys helped me to learn how to think more about role-playing instead of role-playing. I'm going to pretend getting away from minis and maps, playing theater of mind. Absolutely. And thank you. I'll take that as a compliment, because that is how I came to this hobby. I did not learn a system. I wanted to tell a story. And that's why when I do things like this, I feel not qualified, but I feel like I have that experience coming only from that. Most people, they'll find Dungeons and Dragons, they'll learn it, and then they might divert to this. But I never came from a system. I came from wanting to tell a story. And one day we will replay the first game I ever ran, just for fun. Maybe it'll be the last game we ever do, because this won't go on forever. When our final game comes, we will run the first game we ran, and you guys will see how it goes, how it went, because it was fun. But it was just because I wanted to tell a story. And to me, that's why I always come back to that, as it's sort of the prime principle maker. Always enjoy seeing Mycl in costume. Me too. That's why I try to match him. I mean, God, I'm playing a role right now, the professor. I love dressing up. I think it's great. Last time we played, some players made some character unrelated decisions. I was so mad afterwards. It was awful. Character unrelated decisions. Expand on that, because I wouldn't mind weighing in on that. Lilith B? I'm curious what you mean. Not a charisma player. I hate being put on the spot for dialogue with NPCs. It's simpler with the other players playing, but still challenging. Well, see, and this is a great opportunity to talk about game prep. If your GM knows that, if you were someone who doesn't like dealing with NPCs, but I knew that you needed information from an NPC, what I would do is I would incorporate a way for you to get information without having to talk to them, like stealing a map. If they had a piece of information that you need, a map, give you an attack of opportunity, a way to sort of go in the back door and slip it into their pocket, so you don't have to do that. But that also relies sometimes on the PCs to create that idea, to think outside the box and say, yeah, this is how I'd like to attack that. Michael's fun. He's in character costume. So is Harlan and Chris. Good day to all. Be well. Sometimes thanks, Harlan, for the wisdom. Chris. Yes, thanks, Chris. It was when did you become comfortable GMing and felt comfortable with your style of GMing? Right. Thank you for asking that again, because I did completely forgot. When did I become comfortable GMing? And I think because from the get-go, I didn't view it as GMing. I viewed it as storytelling. So I was comfortable from the get-go, because I remember as a kid, in Scouts, being around the campfire telling stories. The only difference was involving the players. I would say, even to this day, I am least comfortable with rules and actually trying to enforce those rules. I mean, I had Call of Cthulhu printed up here for the rules and the campaign notes, and I don't think I used them once. Because to me, and again, it just goes back to the idea, it's just not as important. So that style of GMing and my GMing, I would say, came from the get-go. But again, I only entered this hobby 3 or 4 years ago, so it hasn't been that long. No, it's got to be longer than that. 5 years, 6 years ago? Maybe 6 years ago. Actually, it was pretty long. 7 years ago. Let's go that. I feel that when people play the opposite gender, they tend to do it with the reverence, as they don't want anything harmful for their character. Yeah, I mean, that can happen for sure. And that's why, going back to where Chris was, I would put that as the example to play a character of the opposite sex. To me, that was just perfect. And I actually never thought about it until you asked this question, because I think that's a great way to put it. And I would use him as the example. And Chris would be happy to hear that. I play female 99.9% of the time of all our games. So there you go. I've even played opposite gender in video games. Nothing wrong with opposite. Oh, absolutely. And you're fantastic at it, Bob. I come with character concept, and sometimes the concept requires a race or gender. I played female characters. Yeah, better last forever. I was reading Stephen King's on writing, and he mentioned that writing is telepathy. And the idea of trying to convey things to the reader as simply as possible. Yes. With the least amount of words. I think it'd be useful in GMing too. Yes, it's very true. And again, because no one is without fault, and believe me, at the end of this, I'll list all my faults. I talked to it because I think Justin is sort of most guilty for this. He does tend to really build up, and I'm bad with it too, but sort of these really beautiful, overly articulate sort of things, the grass, the green, beautiful green, crisp grass that crunches beneath your feet as the trees blow softly, the grass wet beneath your it's like, all right, let's just get to the point. Actually, yeah, Stephen King, there's a great tip that he also does. You read it and you read it again, and you cut out what's not necessary, and you bring down to just the basics. What communicates the point? That train opening scene from the first Call of Cthulhu game was 2 pages, and then I cut it down to 1 page. And I would have liked it shorter, but unfortunately, just the detail, I needed certain important pieces. It just had, and the same with the last one. It's a long one for the last game, which detailed how Mary got out of that apartment. But I tried to trim that thing down like 6 times. I was like, okay, no, this all is important. I can't skip over it, unfortunately. So most of the time, yes. Oh my God, I just pictured Invictus in their 70s playing online, possibly VR. That'd be cool. Like the game on trying to get someone to make a recipe by writing and ordering very specifically. That's right. You have to be very specific, like code. Thank you for the answer. No, thank you for the question. How did the name Invictus come to be? I mean, who created that name? Well, Invictus is a poem by William Ernest Henley. I think I've mentioned it many times, but out of the black that covers me, out of the darkness that covers me, black is the pit from pole to pole. I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Undering the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Is it then, it matters not how straight the gate? No, there's one more. Beyond this place of wrath and tears, looms but the horror of the shade. Oh, something. Looms but the horror of the shade. I can't remember. And then the last line is, matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. I have it written there. You can see it right here is actually a Zen pencil's diagram of the poem, which is very cool. So you check it out. But that's Invictus. It's the poem. And I created the name, the Invictus Stream, because I thought it was neat. Invictus wasn't really utilized that much. And the Invictus stream actually was originally intended to sort of be a network, and it might be one day. I wanted the Invictus stream to start off with our core channel, Wednesday night streaming, but my intention in the early days was to scoop up sort of smaller like channels, like, you know, kids who stream Minecraft 7 days a week, or even what Tim's doing, and eventually create the Invictus stream, which was all these smaller channels under our banner sort of playing along, and so that we had a full weeks of content that people enjoyed. That was the intention. Whether it will ever come to that or is interesting any longer, yeah, that's up for a question. It's a lot of work. So there you go. Have you ever found yourself in a situation you thought, this is a good concept for a game? Have you ever found yourself in a situation and thought, this is a good concept for a game? Oh, all the time. I have an ongoing document in my drive. I have a flash drive that I bring everywhere that has my work in progress RPGs, which basically is all of the stuff that I'm working with. Now, these aren't necessarily the ones that I've personally dealt with. There's a few in here that have. The Museum of Ventriloquism is one that I have personally dealt with. But Doom RPG, I have inspiration stuff. My Friend Stanislav, The Ballad of the Skeleton King, A Day in Pompeii. A Day in Pompeii probably will never come to be because I couldn't really get it to a point where I thought it was interesting enough. But the whole point of that one would have been it was an entire game where at the end they would realize it's Pompeii. Like, it would be an ancient city and all this kind of stuff, but it never would really come out that it was Pompeii. Okay, so creating memorable NPCs is sort of the final subject we're going to be dealing with today. And I want to start out with a very good quote from an RPG called Monster Hearts. Monster Hearts is a game of teenage monsters. It's a game that I would never want to play. But one of the quotes that rung true with me is, ultimately, the PCs are stronger than any villain you introduce. Remember to treat your NPCs like stolen cars. They aren't your property, so you don't need to worry about losing them. Have fun with your villains, cause chaos with them, and abandon them the minute they're played out. And this was a really good concept for multiple reasons, because it forced me to introduce more NPCs rather than utilize the same ones over and over again. It made me less fearful of what the characters thought of my NPCs, and it made me more willing to kill them off, aka Max Casey in the latest Call of Cthulhu game. You know, he was a character I liked. I thoroughly did. But I knew his death from the Butcher would intensify the Butcher, make him more serious, as well as, show that anything could happen in the scene. So that's a really good quote. And I think it's important to remember, you know, the NPCs are like stolen cars. They're things you borrow, you use, and then you don't worry about where they go. Oftentimes we create NPCs that we really want the characters to like. And more times than I can count, all of us have fallen into this. You create, you're sitting at home, you're like, oh my God, I have an idea. It's going to be this guy, and he's so cool, and he's got, he's got guns on either hip, and his hair is slicked back, and his name is Snake Plissken. And you think this guy's really going to be really, really neat. And the characters hate him. I can remember a time before the stream that Chris ran this Western game. It was not Deadlands, it was just a Western setting. And we went into this, I don't know, the sheriff's office, and he was like, you looking for a job or whatever? And I was like, what does he look like? And I didn't like him. I just didn't like him. But Chris really thought this guy would be like our companion, and he didn't like that. And I've done it before too, where I created an NPC and I'm like, they're like gonna love this guy, and it turns out they hate him, or I think they're gonna hate this guy, and they end up loving him. So it's always tough. So it's treating them like stolen cars is good advice, but oftentimes, more times than I can count, you do grow attached. So there are NPCs that they will love, there are NPCs that they will hate, and there are NPCs that you want them to love. So let's start off with NPCs that they will love. First off, you can't force them to love an NPC, but I find the most beneficial, if you're trying to create an NPC that you want them to really grow attached to, is allow them to add themselves in some small way to the NPC. Commanding a goblin, naming the NPC or dog, being their master. These are ways that Justin, Michael, and myself and Chris have all utilized NPCs that we want the guys or want whoever's playing to kind of keep with them. Being able to name the dog in Dragon Age, or keeping that small goblin from Draft Askew Secret, meant that he sort of became our responsibility, became a bit more passion. And it's almost as if you gave the PCs the ability to create an NPC, and oftentimes it can work that way. Telling them to create a horse, a backstory for them, forces them to create it, and then taking that horse away and giving them to a later date. Say, okay, hand me that. You don't have this horse yet, is one way to sort of create that sort of companionship. Other ways to make them love the character is not to make them depend on the character, which sounds contradictory, but it's not. If you make if you make a character that they're dependent on, oftentimes they will resent them because they expect them to offer it willingly. And you can kind of try to tug sympathy, you can try to tug forced reactions, but ultimately when it comes to loving an NPC, it is a combination of sort of nonsensical, whatever chance might be, and more so giving them the opportunity to be in charge of it. Giving them the opportunity to, you guys loved that stuffy British guy from Call of Duty, but they didn't like him. They thought he was funny, but they would never want to go back to him. The NPCs that, PCs actually enjoy and love and respect it and go, oh yeah, I want to go back to the guy, were the ones that they didn't require, didn't demand of them, but still benefited them in large ways and were interesting and clever NPCs. So those are them they will love. Those are them they will love. NPCs they will hate, and that's okay if they hate them, but it's ones that will typically withhold information or make some sort of barters or bargains. These are the NPCs that are necessary to campaigns, unfortunately, because they're the quest givers. They're the people who offer gold for the returned horses and things like that. And 9 times out of 10, those are the NPCs that will hate. But if you look at the NPCs that you love, they're the ones that you, like for instance, in Siege and Arrow, this young woman that I ended up marrying or trying to marry, Caraway, I think was her name, was someone that, was given very little description, but I immediately absorbed her and sort of, asked her these questions that sort of allowed me to be in control of her. And that's the way that you can get them hooked on certain NPCs. So going back to what we first said, and I'm gonna Blobby is your favorite NPC. So there you go, Blobby. See, what is your favorite NPC? I don't think we had any sort of issue with him. I'm just gonna scroll up to Bob's question because you asked a question about the NPCs, and I'm going to check it right now. Actually, you know what, Bob? Just post it again if he's here. He's not here. Can someone else post his question again? So going back to what we talked about with game prep, the last step was NPCs. So why was the last step NPCs? Well, 9 times out of 10, when I use an NPC, it is to fulfill an issue. What I do is I think of that setting, the story, the location, and the last step, I allow the NPCs to come naturally based on those demands. So, a train car in an abandoned tunnel, and the PCs need to find an old map hidden in a cart. Introducing an NPC at that point, My story was created with the intention of a young girl missing, with sexual overtones with her quote-unquote father. But the NPCs came secondary. They were things that I needed to fulfill those needs. I needed a villain. And when creating NPC, it's very easy to pick the obvious answer. It's easy to think, okay, well, the villain's going to have sharp eyes. But there's sort of a 3-step process in creating, in my opinion, convincing characters. And first off, it's using the stolen car method. It's having them exist outside of the world you're telling. But, it's being bad, being good, and being bad is the best bad guy. And the best good guy is being good, being bad, and being good. It sounds confusing. And it is. In my opinion, a good bad guy appears bad until he reveals himself to be good, but is in truth bad. A great good guy or good NPC appears good until you realize he's bad and you find out he's good. What does that mean? Let's take Mr. Christian, Andrew Christian. From the get-go, something was off about him. He was staring at a dark painting. He seemed mysterious and, vengeful and angry, but also too sweet. Here's a bad guy. Here's a guy that everyone thought right off the bat, okay, this is a bad guy. Until you found out his daughter died and you revealed it. And the majority of people, including the PCs, turned him off as a bad guy because they saw he was good. And sometimes you need to reveal a bit of the bad to allow the good to kind of seem more beneficial. A bit of the bad was him admitting that he had the suitcase stolen. You knew the previous opening, where where you heard the story of the train robbery or whatever, the suitcase robbery. So you knew someone died because of his actions. So that was the bad, and it sort of revealed itself to be good because it, you said, okay, well, here's a guy who gave us a little bit of this honesty, therefore he must be good. Until you find out the third tier, which is bad. And the same goes opposite for good characters. Here's someone that seems good. This is someone that obviously is a good person. They're trying to help us. But you need to reveal a little bad of them. And you need to reveal that little bit of bad so they can trust them. Because no one is pure good and no one is pure bad. And that's sort of the theme of all of this. And that's sort of the archetypes to follow with any NPCs. If you're trying to make a good guy, good, bad, good. If you're trying to make a bad guy, bad, good, bad. If that makes any sense. I know it's extremely confusing. Unfortunately, I need to think of a better analogy for it. So creating these NPCs based on the situation that you need them. Mark, what's Siege and Arrow? Do you watch any of our shows? What's Hog and Go Traveling? What's Siege and Arrow? Mark, you can't ask questions if you're not going to watch the stream, bud. Like, watch the stream episodes, because that's going to answer 99.9% of literally everything you ask. Again, creating NPCs based on the situations you need them in. Christian was required because I needed a bad guy. Wells was required because I needed a character to kind of hand those things off. But the golden rule with all these is create real people. Use real examples. Take people from literature or movies, films, TV shows that you believe are real. Real characters have layers like that, good, bad, good, and so on and so forth. They aren't all good and they aren't all bad. I talked recently about my least favorite archetype in RPGs. It was on the Reddit Ask Me Anything. And someone asked, what's your least favorite cliche in RPGs? And it's that idea of, there's two doors. One is gold and one is black. The black door says, for honor and justice, enter. And the gold door says, for riches and reward, enter. And it's like, I wonder which door is the good door and which door is the bad door. And rarely someone might switch them just to be weird. But, that's sort of obvious where it's like, this guy's the good guy or this guy's the bad guy. It frustrates me. The same with PCs and the same with NPCs. And this is why, going back to the beginning, I said, I don't like that flowchart. Lawful good, lawful, true, neutral. Because real people don't work like that. And if you're trying to make a real game, in my opinion, you have to use real characters, because real characters have real motivations. And if you're trying to make a convincing scenario, that's how you're going to accomplish it. So, did anyone post Bob's question from way up above? No, I'll scroll up and do it then, because I do want to answer Bob's question, even though he's not here. Oh, there he said, I have a question. Here we go. So Bob asked, I have a creative question in regards to NPCs. Although Dennis Collins started out as an awesome PC, he has since been more of an NPC. I noticed you dropped the awesome, so clearly you don't like him. My question is, how did you come up with the idea of Dennis Collins, and how did you flesh him out? Dennis Collins was meant to be a expendable character in a Running Dead campaign. Running Dead is just in system, where we're put through a bunch of trials and tribulations, and at the end, we are meant to, for the most part, die. And frankly, Dennis Collins, if you watch the beginning of the video, was like a young guy at first, and then I was like, I'll change him to an old guy. So he was made with really no forethought. But it was the first time I played a very unscripted, sort of completely, I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want character. Oh, I just swore. Sorry, 18 plus. It was going to be the first time I was going to play a character where there was no holds bar. And I was going to, shoot anyone that got in my way and be clever and try to win the game. And it was refreshing. And truthfully, there wasn't much thought put into him at the beginning. Turning him to an NPC was an accidental, because we always have the intention of going back to Running Dead and finishing Dennis Collins' story in one shape or another. But the problem is with Dennis Collins as a character is overall he's not that interesting. He's not in my opinion, a campaign-driven character. He's the Kramer. He's a great secondary character, but I wouldn't ever want to see a single show based on him. However, in my opinion, seeing his origins, seeing where he maybe started as a secondary character as well, and showing that he is bad at his core, was a lot more interesting. So switching him to an NPC was easy, but also easy because I got to play him. So it's still the same PC, just from a different perspective almost. I'm glad you enjoyed him so much. I hope you enjoyed him in Call of Cthulhu. I've never heard of Harlan Go Traveling, which I asked. Well, you can search it, so it's there for sure. The Lady or the Tiger. Yes. Siege and Arrow is where I made a joke about Arrow being a superhero. Harlan Go Traveling was a hoot. All NPCs are Oreos. Bad, some good sandwich between the bad, good, some bad sandwich between them, good. Absolutely. And I mean, that's just sort of an easy example. I mean, there is obviously more to it, but to me, that's the premise I always use for it. Because, especially playing my games, the guys have become very skeptical over the years. You know, anyone that appears good is probably bad. How does your prep adjust between light and heavy games? Take Siege and Arrow versus Call of Cthulhu, just examples. But do you use the same approach for light and heavier games? Yes, use the same approach. I would use the example for ease. I would say The End of the World, that one that was in that town, Addison Town or something, where they had those white masks, versus like a Siege and Arrow, or I guess what's a light one that I've run, a one-off. I don't know, something light that I've run off. That's one-off. Same premise, same idea. The only, like, Call of Cthulhu is a different beast because of the detail. It's so important. But when it comes to telling a light and dark story, the premise is exactly the same. Typically, there's a bit more description in a darker story, purely because you're trying to build up tension. Oftentimes, I will add one or two moments where there has to be something intense, and I will pre-script that. The only reason I pre-script that is because I want it to be, like, specific. I don't want it in the run. When it comes to a light story, very little needs to be prepped in that same vein because it doesn't matter as much. You're not trying to hit notes. It's the same way with a horror movie, or like, you know, think of it like a horror movie or, you know, Second City Improv or something like that on stage. You know, the improv is a bit lighter, it's quicker, but they're still similar in the way they're dynamically, well, no, per scene they might be specifically, or they might be similar, but other than that, it will be different, so. All right, awesome, thank you. So, that's how you create memorable NPCs. Again, like we talked about, talking about the NPCs that they'll love, hate, trying to figure them out in that Oreo example that was pointed out, but also using them for the situation that they're required in, and treating them for the most part like stolen cars is the way that I work to create memorable NPCs. So, we've talked about game prep, we've talked about RPG etiquette, and we've ended on creating memorable NPCs. If you have any other questions, please ask them now. In the meantime, I'm just going to check to see if anyone was gracious enough to donate during the stream. It's completely fine if you didn't. But if you did, you get a chance to win something interesting. And it looks like... What's today? No, we didn't. Although Bjorn and David donated quite recently, so they will get a quick shout out too. So well done, guys. But I do want to mention again that this is for Extra Life. So please, if you like seeing this or anything like this, please consider donating to Extra Life. It's a very important charity. The link is in the description. They're very kind and sweet people over there. I've dealt with a few of them who have asked us, you know, for ideas and things like that to help benefit. But so far we have raised a lot, and I am extremely proud of how well we have done. So far, we have raised $1,345. 41 donations received from you guys. It's fantastic. We are like a quarter of the way there. We still have to November. There's still the Hot Ones Challenge. There's still a lot to go, and I'm going to think of a lot more neat rewards. But if you like this sort of format, the INVICTUS RPG Academy, please, first and foremost, like the video. Secondly, share the video if you'd like. And thirdly, let me know, because I can always do more of these and we can unlock them. More subjects to cover, plenty of things to talk about, and all that jazz. I mean, the bad guy NPC that is all evil through and through makes no sense to me. Everyone has goals, and their goals seem to be laudable in their own mind, even if insane. They may be selfish goals, but they're not killing because killing is fun. They're killing because it feeds others. Yes, and I would agree. I would say killing anything is more like a chaos-centric character, and even that I don't think exists. You know, you look at, I mean, it's easy to use archetypes and say, well, you know, and that frustrates me too, because they say, you know, Jean-Luc Picard is lawful good or something like that because he you know, he always honored the objective, and yet there's episodes where he doesn't. So, and that's where I go back to that, the idea that those examples that they often give, that chart where you lie somewhere on here, I don't like them. It's okay if you want to start on that, if you want to say, I'm going to try being a lawful good character, but allow yourself to change. Allow yourself to grow. And that goes with real life as well. If you're the kind of person that has been the same way forever, I think it might be time for a change. Consider all of this in real life. Think of how it might be affecting the people that you love and the people around you. Maybe it's time for a change in one way or another. Love that y'all are doing this charity work. I'm never a multiple donor, though. That's okay. No needs to. Listen, and I appreciate everyone that's donated so far. It has been fantastic. It is the Prime Directive. There you go. It has been such a great opportunity to be helping in every way that we can. You're welcome for the class. It was invaluable. Well, I'm happy. I'm happy it was of some interest. I hope it was some interest. Mike and Tim running 6 p.m. Eastern. Game on. Very nice. You have a few hours there. Yes, I hope you enjoyed. If you have any other questions, feel free to post them here. Plenty that can be spoken about still. And if you are interested in continuing on in any way, shape, or form a dialogue about this, or you'd like to see more of this, then please just let us know. We are always willing to discuss and have more episodes of the INVICTUS RPG Academy. From all of us here at the INVICTUS stream, have a good day. Play hard. Keep rolling? No. Roll. See you around the table. Good evening, and welcome back to the INVICTUS RPG Academy, Episode 1.